Chapter 781. The private meeting room in the Imperial Palace's diplomatic wing was supposed to be neutral ground, a place where even enemies could conduct necessary business without fear of interference or surveillance, which made it the perfect location for Jack Blazespout to spring whatever trap he had been preparing since my engagement announcements shattered his careful political plans. "Arthur," Jack said as I entered the elegantly appointed chamber, his voice carrying that familiar combination of charm and malice that had characterized our relationship since our first confrontation 4 years ago. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me on such short notice." He stood near the room's tall windows, silhouetted against the afternoon light in a way that made his features appear sharper and more predatory than usual. There was something different about his demeanor today, a confidence that went beyond his typical arrogance, as if he knew something I didn't. "Jack," I replied with carefully controlled neutrality, positioning myself where I could observe both him and the room's exits. "Your message suggested urgent business that required private discussion. I'm curious what could be so important." The tension between us was immediate and familiar. For years had passed since our last private confrontation, but nothing had changed about the fundamental dynamic. We both knew exactly what the other was. I understood his connection to the Order of Fallen Flame, while he was aware of Luna's existence within me. A stalemate of mutual knowledge that had kept us from openly destroying each other. "Several things, actually," Jack said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "But let's start with what we both know has always been the most pressing issue between us." "He's different today," Luna's voice whispered in my mind with obvious concern. "More confident, more dangerous. Be very careful, Arthur." "I'm not aware of any pressing issues between us," I replied evenly, though my magical senses were already beginning to detect subtle wrongness in the room's atmosphere. "Perhaps you could be more specific." "Rose Springshaper," Jack said bluntly, his mask of diplomatic courtesy dropping entirely to reveal the obsessive hunger that had driven his interest in her for years. "As I mentioned before, her mother Evelyn has been quite distressed about the lack of communication from her beloved daughter. The Pope of the Order of Fallen Flame feels entitled to guidance regarding Rose's recent marriage arrangements." The demand was both politically impossible and personally offensive, but I recognized it as the same pattern from our previous confrontations. Jack pushing boundaries to see how far he could press before I broke. "And if I decline this request?" I asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear him say it directly. "Then we move to more persuasive approaches," Jack said with the kind of cold smile that suggested he was looking forward to such escalation. "Though I should mention that there's another matter we need to discuss as well." "Which is?" "Alara Astoria," Jack said, his voice carrying a note of possessive anger that made my protective instincts flare immediately. "That particular arrangement was always intended to be temporary. She belongs with someone who can appreciate her unique qualities properly." The barely controlled fury in his voice when he mentioned Alara told me more about his motivations than any amount of political analysis could have revealed. This wasn't just about strategic positioning. Jack had developed genuine feelings for her, which made him exponentially more dangerous. "Alara belongs with whoever she chooses," I replied with steel in my voice, my own anger beginning to override diplomatic caution. "And she's made her choice clear. Any attempt to interfere with that decision would be inadvisable." "Still playing the noble protector, Emperor of the world?" Jack asked with obvious amusement, using the title he had discovered during our first confrontation. "How long do you think you can keep protecting all of them against us?" The echo of his words from 4 years ago sent chills down my spine. He had threatened me then about my inability to protect everyone I cared about, and now he was making good on that promise. "Be very careful about your next words, Jack," I said quietly, my voice carrying the kind of controlled threat that came from peak ascendant rank magical power barely held in check. "Some accusations can't be taken back." "Threats, Arthur," Jack replied with obvious delight, his own magical aura beginning to manifest as dark energy that seemed to absorb light rather than reflecting it. "From someone who's supposed to be a pillar of civilized society? How disappointing." I could feel the room's atmosphere growing heavier as both our magical energies clashed in the space between us. Peak Ascendant rank power was nothing to trifle with, and having two such forces in direct opposition was creating pressure that made the air itself seem to vibrate with potential violence. "You know what I am, and I know what you are," I said, allowing some of my true power to manifest as golden light that pushed back against Jack's encroaching darkness. "The difference is that I'm not hiding behind political immunity while threatening innocent people." "Innocent?" Jack laughed with genuine mirth. "Arthur, you really don't understand what's happening here, do you? This isn't about innocence or guilt. This is about power, and you've just proven that you don't have enough to stop what's coming." Without further warning, Jack's energy erupted outward in a wave of dark force that shattered several pieces of furniture and sent me staggering backward. Peak Ascendant rank or not, his attack carried the kind of raw malevolence that spoke to powers beyond normal magical training. I responded instinctively, golden energy spiraling around me in defensive patterns while I prepared counterattacks that could level buildings if not carefully controlled. But even as we engaged in combat that should have been impossible in the heart of the Imperial Palace, part of my mind was analyzing the strangeness of the situation. "You're stronger than before?" I realized as our energies clashed in the center of the room, creating feedback loops that made the walls themselves groan under the pressure. "The heavenly demon's influence has grown." "What I had to do," Jack snarled as he pressed his attack, miasma taking forms that seemed to move independently of his conscious control. "What you forced me to do when you stole everything that should have been mine." I was beginning to notice something odd about Jack's defensive patterns. He was leaving openings, subtle ones carefully disguised, but definitely intentional gaps in his guard that seemed designed to invite specific attacks. As if he wanted me to hit him in particular ways. The realization came too late. As my astral blade sliced across Jack's shoulder, drawing blood that should have weakened him, I felt something cold and alien surge through the contact point between our magical auras. Miasma that felt like corruption itself flowed into my system faster than I could react to block it. "What?" I began, but Jack's triumphant smile told me everything I needed to know. "Miasma," he said with obvious satisfaction as the alien energy spread through my magical pathways like poison. "Difficult to detect until it's too late, impossible to remove without specialized knowledge, and absolutely damning when discovered during official investigations." "Arthur," Luna's voice screamed in my mind as the corruption tried to reach toward her presence. "He's planned this perfectly. The miasma signature will be impossible to explain." The room's doors burst open as Imperial Knights in full combat gear flooded into the chamber, their weapons drawn and their magical sensors already scanning for threats. Their leader took one look at the destroyed room, the combatants, and the readings on his detection equipment before his face went pale with shock. "Miasma detected," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Grandmaster Nightingale is showing positive readings for miasmic contamination." "Citizens of the Empire?" Jack called out in a voice that carried clearly to the assembled knights. "I call upon you to witness. Arthur Nightingale has revealed himself as a demonic contractor, corrupted by powers that threaten our very civilization." As the miasma continued spreading through my system and the Imperial Knights moved to surround me with weapons that could neutralize peak Ascendant rank threats, I finally understood the full scope of Jack's trap. He had orchestrated this entire confrontation, knowing exactly how I would respond to threats against Rose and Alara, planning for the moment when he could inject demonic energy during our combat and then call for witnesses to discover the evidence of my corruption. The Imperial Palace's high-security detention facility was designed to contain threats that conventional prisons couldn't handle, magical criminals whose abilities posed dangers to both guards and fellow inmates. As I sat in the center of a cell lined with Etherite-infused barriers that could neutralize even peak Ascendant rank power, I found myself reflecting on how completely Jack had outmaneuvered me. "Not even 12 hours," I murmured to myself, studying the intricate runic patterns that covered every surface of my confinement. From the most powerful guild grandmaster in the world to accused demon contractor in less than half a day. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same magical suppression technology that I had helped fund through guild research grants was now being used to ensure I couldn't escape or communicate with the outside world. The Aetheryte barriers hummed with constant energy, creating a field that made even basic magical techniques impossible to maintain. "Arthur," Luna's voice whispered in my mind, though I could sense how much effort it was taking for her to communicate through the suppression field. "The miasma is spreading faster than we anticipated. My presence is slowing it, but you can't stop it completely," I finished, feeling the cold corruption continuing its inexorable advance through my magical pathways. "How long do we have before it reaches critical levels?" "Days, not weeks," Luna replied with obvious distress. "The injection was far more sophisticated than anything I've encountered before. This isn't just raw demonic energy. It's been specifically crafted to resist purification attempts." I closed my eyes and focused inward, using techniques I had developed during my magical training to examine the alien presence that was slowly consuming my system from within. What I found was both fascinating and terrifying from a theoretical perspective. The miasma wasn't behaving like a typical magical contamination. Instead of spreading randomly through my body, it was following specific pathways, targeting the exact channels I used for my most advanced techniques, seeking out the connection points where Luna's presence was strongest. Someone with intimate knowledge of Qilin-human bonding had designed this corruption specifically to counter my unique circumstances. Jack knew exactly what he was doing. I realized with growing appreciation for the depth of his planning. This miasma was created specifically to target someone bonded with a Qilin. He's been preparing for this confrontation for years. The memory of our battle played through my mind with painful clarity. I had reacted exactly as Jack had predicted, responding to his threats against Rose and Alara with protective fury that overrode my strategic thinking. The moment he had successfully provoked me into physical combat, the trap had been set. But it was the specific technique he had used during the injection that truly demonstrated his sophistication. When I had attempted to use Lucent Harmony to seal off the spreading corruption, Jack's Nirvana flames had somehow interfered with Luna's power directly. "The flames," I said aloud, working through the implications. "He used Nirvana flames to burn through your defensive barriers." I leaned back against the cell wall, feeling the weight of my situation settling over me like a physical presence. Jack hadn't just framed me for demonic contamination. He had done so using techniques specifically designed to ensure that my most powerful defensive capabilities would be useless against his accusations. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside my cell drew my attention back to immediate circumstances. Since my arrest, I had been kept in complete isolation. No visitors, no communication with the outside world, no contact with anyone except the guards who delivered meals and monitored my condition. "Any word from my legal counsel?" I asked as a guard approached with what appeared to be my evening meal. "No visitors," the guard replied curtly, sliding a tray through the meal slot without making eye contact. "Direct orders from the Emperor himself. No communication until the investigation is complete." The complete isolation was another stroke of Jack's genius. By ensuring that I couldn't contact my allies, he was preventing me from coordinating any defense while also allowing rumors and speculation to spread unchecked throughout the political community. Every hour I remained incommunicado was another hour for doubt to grow about my innocence. I picked at the simple meal while considering my strategic options. The miasma was real and detectable. Any magical examination would confirm its presence in my system. The evidence of our magical battle was undeniable. The destroyed meeting room bore witness to peak ascendant rank combat. And Jack's testimony as a duke's son carried political weight that would be difficult to challenge directly. "The only way to prove my innocence is to reveal your existence," I realized with growing certainty. "A Qilin's testimony would be impossible to dismiss, and your presence proves that I couldn't be corrupted by demonic forces." The cell's lighting system dimmed automatically as evening approached, leaving me in the kind of subdued illumination that was designed to maintain circadian rhythms while preventing the disorientation that could lead to escape attempts. I found myself staring at the ceiling, where runic patterns continued their endless cycle of energy circulation. Hours passed in silence as I worked through various scenarios and contingencies. Jack had planned this trap with meticulous attention to detail, but he had also made certain assumptions about my capabilities and resources that might prove to be mistakes. The corruption spreading through my system was designed to resist conventional purification techniques, but Luna's presence wasn't conventional. She was a Qilin after all, with capabilities that even the Order of Fallen Flame might not fully understand. "Luna," I said quietly, "what if we don't try to resist the miasma directly? What if we use it?" "What do you mean?" she asked with obvious confusion. "The corruption is designed to target our connection specifically," I explained, working through the theoretical framework as I spoke. "But if we can trace its pathways back to their source, we might be able to identify not just Jack's involvement, but the specific techniques used to create it." "That's incredibly dangerous," Luna warned. "Actively engaging with demonic corruption could accelerate its spread exponentially. But it could also provide the evidence we need to prove where it came from," I countered. "Jack's confidence comes from believing that he's left no trace of his involvement. If we can demonstrate that the miasma was artificially created and injected rather than naturally contracted." The sound of multiple footsteps in the corridor interrupted my planning. This was different from the usual guard rotations. More people, moving with the kind of formal precision that suggested official business rather than routine security checks. A senior guard appeared at my cell door, flanked by two officials in imperial regalia that marked them as representatives of the Emperor's Justice Ministry. "Grandmaster Nightingale," the senior guard announced with formal ceremony, "by order of His Imperial Majesty Quinn Slatemark, you are hereby notified that formal proceedings regarding charges of demonic contamination and possible collaboration with hostile entities will commence tomorrow at dawn." One of the officials stepped forward with a scroll bearing imperial seals. "You are entitled to legal representation, though communication restrictions remain in effect until the trial begins. The proceedings will be conducted before a tribunal of 7 imperial magistrates, with representatives from all 5 continents serving as observers. The charges," the other official continued, "include suspicion of demonic contamination, possible collaboration with the Order of Fallen Flame, and endangering imperial security through concealment of supernatural influences." The formal language made the situation feel both more real and more surreal. In less than 24 hours, I would be standing trial for crimes that could result in anything from exile to execution, depending on what evidence was presented and how convincing Jack's performance proved to be. The Imperial Tribunal Chamber was a monument to justice and political theater in equal measure. A vast hall designed to accommodate not just the 7 magistrates who would determine my fate, but the Empire's most influential nobles whose presence transformed this trial into a spectacle that would define imperial politics for generations. As I was escorted to the defendant's position, I noted representatives from every major noble house seated in the gallery, their expressions ranging from curiosity to carefully controlled concern. Emperor Quinn Slatemark presided over the proceedings from an elevated throne that emphasized both his authority and his supposed impartiality. To his right sat the 7 magistrates who would actually render judgment, while to his left, a section had been reserved for magical experts and imperial scholars whose testimony might prove relevant to charges of demonic contamination. "The Imperial Tribunal will now hear the case of suspected demonic contamination against Guild Grandmaster Arthur Nightingale," announced the Chief Magistrate, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's enhanced acoustics. "The accused stands charged with demonic contamination, possible collaboration with hostile supernatural entities, and endangering imperial security through concealment of dangerous influences. My legal counsel, a team of the Empire's finest advocates, had been given less than 12 hours to prepare a defense against charges that carried the potential for exile or execution. They sat at a table beside me, their expressions professionally composed despite the obvious impossibility of their task. "The prosecution will present its evidence," the Chief Magistrate continued, gesturing toward where Jack Blazespout stood with a team of imperial prosecutors. "Lord Jack Blazespout, as the primary witness and victim of the alleged attack, you may proceed." Jack rose with the kind of confident grace that had always characterized his public appearances, dressed in formal attire that emphasized both his noble status and his role as an injured party seeking justice. His performance over the next hour was nothing short of masterful. "Honorable magistrates," Jack began, his voice carrying the perfect combination of wounded dignity and civic responsibility. "It pains me to stand before this tribunal with evidence against someone I once considered a colleague and fellow student. But the security of our empire demands that truth be revealed, regardless of personal considerations." What followed was a systematic presentation of evidence so comprehensive and damning that I found myself genuinely impressed by the depth of Jack's preparation. Magical detection readings showed clear traces of demonic miasma in my system. Witnesses testified to the destructive magical combat that had occurred in the palace meeting room. Expert analysis of the energy signatures confirmed the presence of corruption that could only come from prolonged exposure to demonic influences. Furthermore, Jack continued, producing what appeared to be historical documents. Investigation into Grandmaster Nightingale's rapid rise to power reveals patterns consistent with supernatural enhancement. No purely human mage could have achieved peak ascendant rank capabilities at his age without external assistance. My legal team attempted to challenge various pieces of evidence, but their objections were systematically overruled or countered with additional documentation. Jack had anticipated every possible line of defense and prepared responses that made my advocates appear incompetent rather than merely outmatched. The magical resonance patterns detected during our confrontation, Jack explained to a panel of expert witnesses, indicate that Grandmaster Nightingale has been corrupted for months, possibly years. The sophistication of the concealment suggests long-term collaboration with entities that specialize in hiding demonic influences from conventional detection. Throughout this systematic destruction of my reputation and legal position, I remained seated calmly at the defendant's table, showing no sign of distress or desperation despite the mounting evidence against me. My composed demeanor seemed to puzzle both the magistrates and the assembled nobles. Most accused individuals facing such overwhelming evidence would be visibly struggling to maintain their composure. "In conclusion," Jack said with obvious satisfaction as he surveyed the tribunal chamber, "the evidence clearly demonstrates that Arthur Nightingale has been corrupted by demonic influences, poses a direct threat to imperial security, and must be dealt with according to the full severity of imperial law." The silence that followed was heavy with political implications. Everyone present understood that convicting the Guild Grandmaster of demonic collaboration would reshape the empire's economic structure, create massive instability, and potentially trigger conflicts that could spread beyond imperial borders. "Does the defense wish to present evidence or testimony?" the chief magistrate asked, though his tone suggested he considered the outcome already determined. My lead advocate rose with obvious reluctance. "Your Honor, given the comprehensive nature of the prosecution's case, the defense requests a brief recess to—" "That won't be necessary," I said clearly, rising from my seat for the first time since the trial began. "I have evidence that will definitively resolve all questions about my innocence or guilt." The surprised murmur that rippled through the chamber reflected the shock everyone felt at my confident interruption. Jack's expression shifted from satisfaction to curiosity, though he maintained his composure with practiced ease. What evidence could possibly counter the documented proof of demonic contamination? Jack asked with obvious amusement. "The magical readings are undeniable. The expert analysis is conclusive, and the evidence," I said with a smile that made Jack's confidence falter slightly, "is that demonic corruption is impossible for someone like me." "Your Honor," Jack said quickly, "the defendant is clearly attempting to delay proceedings with—" His words were cut off as the air in the center of the chamber began to shimmer with golden light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The temperature rose noticeably as magical energy of a purity and power that most people had never experienced began to manifest in the space between the magistrates and the defendant's table. And then Luna appeared, not in the childlike form she had usually maintained, but in her true manifestation as one of the most ancient and powerful guardian spirits in existence. Her amethyst hair cascaded down her back in waves that seemed to contain actual starlight, while her golden eyes held wisdom accumulated over millennia of guiding human civilization. She was beautiful in a way that transcended mere physical appearance, the kind of ethereal perfection that made everyone present understand they were witnessing something genuinely divine. Luna materialized directly behind me, her arms wrapping around my shoulders in an embrace that spoke to bonds forged over years of shared purpose and mutual trust. Her presence radiated such pure magical energy that the demonic miasma in my system began retreating automatically, unable to coexist with her overwhelming sanctity. "I am Luna," she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the chamber with supernatural clarity. "And Arthur Nightingale is my chosen contractor and the future emperor of the world." The complete silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several nobles rising from their seats in shock. Emperor Qin himself leaned forward with obvious amazement, while the magistrates stared with expressions that cycled through disbelief, awe, and growing understanding. 1,000 years ago, Luna continued, her golden eyes surveying the assembled tribunal with ancient authority, "I guided Julius Slatemark in founding this very empire. I have returned to guide another human in protecting not just the Slatemark territories, but all of human civilization from the threats that gather in darkness." She turned her gaze directly toward Jack, who had gone pale with obvious shock and growing terror as he realized the full implications of her revelation. "No human bonded to a Qilin can be corrupted by demonic influences," Luna declared with finality that made the chamber's magical detection systems chime in harmonious confirmation. "The presence of miasma in Arthur's system is proof of external contamination, not internal corruption. Someone with access to sophisticated demonic magic has attempted to frame an innocent man." I looked directly at Jack, noting how his confident facade was crumbling as he grappled with the impossibility of arguing against a Qilin's testimony. The same magical detection systems that had condemned me now confirmed Luna's presence and validated every word she spoke. Checkmate. The moment Luna materialized in my tribunal chamber, radiating power that made the very air shimmer with authority, I felt a mixture of vindication and profound unease settle in my chest. For weeks, I had been wrestling with doubts about allowing this trial to proceed, knowing what I knew about the Nightingale family name and its implications for the Slatemark Empire's continued existence. Arthur Nightingale. Now, watching Luna embrace Arthur with obvious affection while declaring him her chosen contractor and the future emperor of the world, I was beginning to understand that the Nightingales than I had ever imagined. The systematic destruction of Jack Blaispout's carefully constructed case was proceeding exactly as I had hoped it would, though the revelation of a living Qilin, let alone the same one who contracted with my ancestor, exceeded even my most optimistic expectations for how Arthur might exonerate himself. When Jack had first approached imperial prosecutors with his accusations of demonic contamination, every instinct I possessed had screamed warnings about the fundamental impossibility of such charges against someone bearing the Nightingale name. But I had allowed the trial to proceed anyway, partly because denying legal proceedings without clear justification would have created political complications that could destabilize the Empire's justice system, partly because I needed to understand the full scope of whatever game Jack was playing and who else might be involved in attempts to destroy Arthur's influence, but mostly because I wanted to see what Arthur Nightingale would do when pressed to his absolute limits. The results were exceeding my wildest expectations. "No human bonded to a Qilin can be corrupted by demonic influences," Luna declared with authority that made the chamber's most sophisticated magical detection systems chime in harmonious agreement. "The presence of miasma in Arthur's system is proof of external contamination, not internal corruption." The special Nightingale, I thought with growing certainty, remembering the specific phrase my grandfather had used when describing the bloodline's ultimate potential. Arthur may actually be the one we were warned about. The implications were staggering. If Arthur truly was the prophesied member of the Nightingale bloodline, then his influence would eventually eclipse not just the Slatemark Empire, but potentially all existing political structures. And my son Valerian had been foolish enough to challenge such a being directly. Valerian, I reflected with a mixture of sadness and resigned pragmatism. You never understood that politics is about recognizing forces larger than yourself and adapting accordingly. The decision to strip Valerian of his princely status and reduce him to a county title through marriage had been both necessary and painful. As a father, I regretted the need to essentially exile my own son from royal life. As an emperor, I understood that allowing him to continue threatening Arthur would have put the entire Slatemark bloodline at risk. The historical records were clear about what happened to ruling families who made enemies of the Nightingales. I would not allow the Slatemark Empire to join that list of cautionary tales. Valerian would live comfortably as a count, managing a prosperous territory far from the capital where his limited political instincts could do minimal damage. It was a generous fate considering how close he had come to triggering consequences that could have destroyed our entire dynasty. He was never going to amount to much anyway. I admitted to myself with paternal honesty that was both cruel and accurate. Valerian lacks the intelligence for complex political strategy, the magical strength for effective leadership, and the wisdom to recognize his own limitations. Cecilia, by contrast, had demonstrated exactly the kind of sophisticated thinking that imperial succession required. Her systematic destruction of Valerian's political rebellion had been a masterpiece of strategic timing and calculated ruthlessness. She understood that some threats needed to be eliminated decisively rather than merely contained. And her engagement to Arthur represented perhaps the most advantageous political alliance in Slatemark history. If Arthur is truly the special Nightingale, I mused, watching Luna's golden eyes survey the tribunal chamber, then Cecilia will become not just Empress of the Slatemark Empire, but partner to someone whose influence spans the world. The thought should have been intimidating, the prospect of my daughter marrying someone whose power might eventually surpass my own. Instead, I felt a kind of anticipatory excitement about the possibilities such an alliance could create. Furthermore, Luna continued, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the chamber's very architecture. The magical techniques used to inject this corruption into Arthur's system bear signatures that can be traced back to their source. We need only examine the miasma's composition to identify who possesses both the knowledge and resources necessary to create such sophisticated contamination. The trap was closing around Jack with inexorable precision. Luna's testimony had not only exonerated Arthur but provided a clear path for exposing whoever had orchestrated the frame job. The Chealant's wisdom was being applied to modern investigative techniques with devastating effectiveness. The political ramifications would be extraordinary. Arthur would emerge from this trial not just vindicated, but elevated to an almost mythical status among the Empire's nobility. The man who commanded loyalty from a Chealan would be virtually untouchable through conventional political maneuvering. And that was exactly what the Slatemark Empire needed. The challenges facing human civilization were growing more complex every year. International tensions, economic instabilities, technological disruptions that created new forms of social conflict. Traditional approaches to governance were proving increasingly inadequate for managing such multifaceted problems. But a leader blessed by one of the ancient guardian spirits, commanding resources that spanned continents while maintaining connection to wisdom accumulated over millennia? Such a leader might be capable of achievements that conventional political structures could never accomplish. Arthur Nightingale, I realized with growing conviction, may be exactly what this world needs to navigate the challenges ahead. As Luna's testimony continued to systematically dismantle every aspect of Jack's accusations while building an irrefutable case for Arthur's innocence, I found myself smiling for the first time since this crisis had begun. The special Nightingale had revealed himself at last, and I had to do him service with a bow like I was meant to. The systematic destruction of Jack's carefully constructed accusations should have filled me with pure satisfaction. Watching Luna's testimony dismantle every piece of evidence while revealing the true nature of the corruption in my system was exactly the vindication I had hoped for when I decided to reveal her existence to the world. The magical signatures embedded within the miasma, Luna continued with clinical precision that would have impressed any forensic expert, carry distinctive markers that indicate artificial creation rather than natural contamination. The energy patterns are consistent with techniques developed by the Order of Fallen Flame, specifically their methods for weaponizing demonic corruption. The tribunal chamber remained in stunned silence as Luna's analysis provided not just proof of my innocence, but clear evidence of who had orchestrated the frame job. The assembled nobles were witnessing the return of legendary powers they had thought lost to history, while simultaneously learning that one of their own had been exposed as an agent of humanity's oldest enemies. I should have been experiencing pure triumph as I watched Jack's political career and personal reputation crumble around him. The man who had threatened Rose and Alara, who had systematically planned my destruction for years, was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Justice was being served with supernatural authority that no conventional legal system could have provided. But something was wrong. As I studied Jack's expression during Luna's testimony, a growing sense of unease began to override my satisfaction. His face showed all the appropriate signs of shock and despair. Pale complexion, wide eyes, trembling hands as he struggled to process the impossibility of arguing against Achillen's testimony. To most observers, he appeared to be a man watching his carefully laid plans crumble into ruin. But I knew Jack better than most observers. I had seen his genuine emotional responses during our previous confrontations, witnessed both his cold calculation and his moments of authentic fury. And something about his current expression felt performed. Why is he acting surprised? I wondered, my analytical mind beginning to work through the implications even as Luna continued her devastating testimony. Jack has known about Luna's existence for years. He detected her presence during our first confrontation at Rose's party, used that knowledge to threaten me. So why does he look shocked by her manifestation? The question nagged at me as I recalled our previous interactions in detail. Jack had definitely known about Luna. He had called me Emperor of the World, specifically because he was aware of her presence and what it implied about my potential. He had threatened that I couldn't protect everyone against us, clearly indicating knowledge of supernatural forces that most people couldn't even imagine. He knew Luna existed, I realized with growing alarm. He knew she was bonded to me, knew what that meant for my resistance to demonic corruption. So why would he frame me for demonic contamination if he understood that Achillen's presence would make such charges impossible to sustain? The answer hit me like a physical blow. Jack hadn't expected his accusations to succeed permanently. He had known from the beginning that Luna's testimony would exonerate me completely, which meant the trial itself wasn't his real objective. It was a means to a different end entirely. But what end? I wondered, my sense of unease growing stronger as I watched Jack's performance continue. What could he possibly gain from exposing his own connection to the Order of Fallen Flame? Why would he sacrifice his political position and noble status for a frame job that he knew would ultimately fail? Luna's voice drew my attention back to her testimony as she reached the most damning portion of her analysis. The specific techniques used to create and inject this corruption require not just knowledge of demonic magic, but access to artifacts and resources that only the highest levels of the Order of Fallen Flame possess. The individual responsible for this attack would necessarily hold a position of significant authority within that organization. The implication was clear to everyone present. Jack wasn't just connected to the Order of Fallen Flame, he was one of its senior operatives. The evidence Luna was presenting would result in his immediate arrest and investigation that would expose the full extent of his treasonous activities. And yet, as I watched him more carefully, I noticed subtle signs that contradicted his apparent distress. His breathing was too controlled for someone experiencing genuine panic. His posture maintained elements of confidence despite his supposed devastation. Most tellingly, his eyes held a calculating gleam that suggested he was still thinking several moves ahead, rather than simply reacting to unexpected defeat. This is all part of his plan, I realized with dawning horror. Jack wanted Luna to reveal herself publicly. He wanted her testimony to expose his connection to the Order. But why? Furthermore, Luna continued, her golden eyes focusing directly on Jack with ancient authority. The corruption carries psychic impressions that allow me to trace its creation back to its source. I can identify not just the techniques used, but the specific individual who crafted this particular contamination. Jack's expression finally showed what appeared to be genuine emotion, but it wasn't fear or despair. For just a moment, his mask slipped enough to reveal something that looked remarkably like anticipation. As if Luna's ability to trace the corruption's origin was exactly what he had been hoping for. The answer came to me with sickening clarity. Jack hadn't been trying to frame me for demonic corruption. He had been trying to force me to reveal Luna's existence publicly, knowing that her testimony would expose his connection to the Order of Fallen Flame. But if he was willing to sacrifice his position and status for that revelation, it meant the Order had plans that required Luna's existence to be known. I can now identify the specific source of... Luna began, but she never finished her sentence. The explosion that rocked the Imperial Tribunal chamber was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not the clean, focused destruction of military ordnance or magical combat, but something far more sinister. A blast that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality itself, creating ruptures in space that leaked energies no human science could explain. The chamber's defensive barriers, designed to contain peak ascendant rank magical combat, shattered like glass under forces that operated according to completely different physical laws. Ancient stone walls that had stood for centuries cracked and crumbled as dimensional instabilities spread outward from multiple points throughout the room. Through the chaos of collapsing architecture and screaming nobles, I caught a glimpse of Jack's face in the moment before the blast wave reached him. He wasn't cowering or trying to protect himself like everyone else in the chamber. He was smiling. Not the desperate grin of someone who had triggered a last resort weapon, but the satisfied expression of someone whose carefully laid plan was proceeding exactly as intended. Even as the explosion threatened to bring down the entire chamber around us, Jack looked like a man who had just achieved his primary objective. The realization that I had walked directly into a trap far more sophisticated than anything I had anticipated filled me with cold fury even as the chamber continued to disintegrate around us. Jack had sacrificed his political position, his noble status, and his personal safety to create conditions where Luna would be forced to reveal herself to the world. And now, as emergency alarms blared throughout the Imperial Palace and magical energies that shouldn't exist in normal reality continued to tear through the tribunal chamber, I was beginning to understand that the real battle was just beginning. The executive conference room at Ouroboros Guild headquarters had been transformed into an impromptu sanctuary for the most important people in Arthur's life. While the Guild Grandmaster faced trial for his freedom and reputation, those who loved him waited in the kind of tense silence that came from knowing their entire world could change based on events they couldn't control or influence. Stella sat curled up on one of the large couches, her mathematical workbooks forgotten as she stared at the wall display showing news coverage of the trial. At 9 years old, she understood enough to know that Arthur was in serious trouble, but not enough to comprehend the full implications of demonic contamination charges. "When will Daddy come home?" she asked for the third time in an hour, her voice carrying the kind of innocent worry that made every adult in the room feel the weight of their helplessness. "Soon, sweetheart," Alice replied with gentle reassurance that masked her own anxiety. "Arthur is very smart, and he has the best lawyers in the Empire helping him." But despite her comforting words, the strain was visible on her face. The news reports had been increasingly grim throughout the day, with expert commentators discussing the severity of demonic contamination charges and the potential consequences Arthur might face if convicted. Douglas sat nearby, his business-trained mind clearly working through various scenarios and contingencies. "The evidence they're presenting seems very comprehensive," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of concern that came from understanding political realities. "Magical contamination readings, expert testimony, witness accounts. But it doesn't make sense," Arya interjected with the forthright honesty that characterized her approach to complex situations. "Arthur has never shown any interest in dark magic or forbidden techniques. He's always been focused on building legitimate power through business and political alliances." Alara sat silently near the windows, her violet eyes reflecting deep worry mixed with confusion about how quickly her new life had become entangled with such serious allegations. She had agreed to marry Arthur to prevent civil war and protect herself from Prince Valerian's abuse, but she hadn't anticipated that their engagement would thrust her into the middle of accusations involving demonic corruption. "The charges are absolutely ridiculous," Rachel said with sudden firmness that drew everyone's attention. Her deep blue eyes held the kind of absolute conviction that came from knowledge rather than mere hope. "Arthur could never be convicted of demonic contamination because it's literally impossible." Cecilia nodded in immediate agreement, her crimson eyes reflecting the same certainty. "Rachel is completely correct. These accusations are not just false. They're fundamentally impossible given Arthur's true nature. What do you mean? Alice asked with obvious confusion. How can you be so certain when the evidence seems so convincing? Serafina exchanged meaningful glances with Rose and Reka before speaking with characteristic directness. Because Arthur is special, in a way that makes it impossible for him to be involved with miasma. I don't understand, Arya said softly, her voice carrying genuine bewilderment. What kind of protection could possibly guarantee immunity from demonic influences? The 6 women who had known Arthur's secret looked at each other with obvious agreement about what needed to be revealed. The time for careful secrecy had passed. Their families deserved to understand why they remained completely confident despite the mounting evidence against him. Arthur is bonded with the Qilin, Rose said clearly, her business-trained mind recognizing the need for direct communication during crisis situations. One of the ancient guardian spirits who once guided human civilization. Her name is Luna, and she's been his companion for years. The same Luna who bonded with founding Emperor Julius Slatemark. The silence that followed this revelation was profound, as Arthur's family and Alara struggled to process information that challenged their understanding of what was possible in the modern world. Stella looked up from her position on the couch with obvious excitement rather than disbelief. Arthur has a magical friend? Like a fairy godmother. Something like that, Cecilia replied with obvious affection for the child's innocent interpretation. Luna is incredibly powerful and completely devoted to protecting Arthur from any form of harm. So the trial, Arya began, understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. Will end with Arthur's complete vindication, Serafina finished with cold certainty. Luna's testimony will not only prove his innocence but expose whoever orchestrated this frame job. Qilins cannot lie, and their word is absolute truth in any legal proceeding. Arthur's parents exchanged looks of amazement mixed with relief as they processed the implications of what they had just learned. Their son wasn't just innocent of the charges against him. He possessed protection that made such charges fundamentally impossible. But if Arthur has such powerful protection, Alara asked thoughtfully, then who would be foolish enough to attempt framing him for demonic contamination? Surely anyone with knowledge of supernatural forces would understand the impossibility of such accusations succeeding. Someone who wanted the frame job to be exposed, Rose replied with growing certainty in her voice. Someone who knew that Arthur would be forced to reveal Luna's existence to prove his innocence. Jack Blazespout, Rachel said with cold anger that surprised everyone present. Jack, Alara said with shock that bordered on denial. But he seemed so genuinely concerned about Arthur's behavior, so worried about potential corruption. Why would he frame someone for crimes he might be committing himself? The innocent question revealed how much Alara still didn't understand about the sophisticated deception that had characterized Jack's entire approach to their social circle. Because Jack Blazespout is not who he appears to be, Cecilia explained with political insight born from years of training in recognizing hidden threats. His charm and apparent concern are tools he uses to manipulate people while pursuing agendas that serve darker purposes. The most effective villains are those who can maintain perfect facades, Serafina added with military precision. Jack's public persona has been carefully crafted to hide his true nature and connections. Before Alara could respond to this disturbing revelation about someone she had considered a reasonable suitor, the building's emergency communication system activated with urgent tones that made everyone in the room immediately alert. Elias appeared in the doorway with obvious urgency, his usually composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled alarm. Your Highnesses, ladies, we have a developing situation that requires immediate attention. What kind of situation? Cecilia asked, automatically taking charge with the authority that came from her royal training and political experience. There are reports of explosions and combat throughout the city, Elias replied, consulting the tablet that connected him to the guild's intelligence networks. The Imperial Palace, major government buildings, key infrastructure points, all appear to be under coordinated assault. Where specifically is the fighting concentrated? Serafina asked with strategic precision, her mind already working through defensive and response options. Elias met their eyes with an expression that conveyed the full scope of the catastrophe they were facing. "Your Highness," he said with grim certainty, "the attacks aren't concentrated in any specific area. According to our intelligence reports, the entire capital city of Avalon is under siege." The first sign of danger came as delicate black rose petals began drifting through the sealed windows of the Ouroboros Guild headquarters, their dark beauty carrying an otherworldly elegance that immediately set everyone's magical senses on edge. The petals moved with unnatural purpose, flowing through the conference room like living shadows that seemed to absorb light rather than reflecting it. "Everyone get back," Rachel commanded with authority, golden light beginning to manifest around her as she recognized the hostile nature of the intrusion. "Those aren't natural flowers." Rose shot to her feet with expression of dawning horror as she recognized the distinctive magical signature emanating from the floating petals. "Mother," she whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of fear and resigned recognition that made everyone else in the room understand they were facing something far beyond normal magical threats. The black rose petals continued their inexorable advance despite Rachel's defensive barriers, their dark energy proving resistant to conventional purification techniques. Cecilia's imperial flame magic flared around the group, creating layers of protection that slowed but couldn't stop the approaching corruption. "What are they?" Alice asked with obvious terror as she pulled Stella closer, maternal instincts overriding her confusion about supernatural forces she didn't understand. "Miasma," Rose replied with grim certainty, her own blue rose petals beginning to manifest as she prepared for what she knew would be an impossible battle. Seraphina's ice crystal plum blossoms joined the defensive layers around Arthur's family, while Reka's cursed text added additional shielding that glowed with violet light. But all 5 women could feel their combined defenses weakening under the relentless pressure of the approaching petals. "We can't hold them," Cecilia said through gritted teeth, her imperial training providing tactical analysis even in the midst of crisis. "The power behind this attack is radiant rank. We need—" Her words were cut off as brilliant red flames suddenly erupted throughout the conference room, incinerating the black rose petals with such intensity that they didn't even have time to wither. They simply ceased to exist as the purification fire consumed every trace of their corrupt energy. The building shook with tremendous force as something far more powerful than conventional explosives tore through the Ouroboros Guild's structural defenses. Advanced magical barriers that could withstand peak ascendant rank attacks crumbled like paper under forces that operated according to fundamentally different physical laws. "Everyone out now," Elias shouted as he appeared in the doorway, his usually composed demeanor replaced by urgent efficiency. "The entire building is compromised. We have evacuation routes prepared for exactly this scenario." But as the group rushed toward the emergency exits, the external wall of the conference room simply vanished, not destroyed by explosion, but erased by magic that rewrote the fundamental structure of matter itself. Through the massive opening, they could see a battle being waged in the skies above Avalon City that defied every assumption about what was possible in the modern world. 2 women faced each other in midair, their magical auras so intense that the very atmosphere around them seemed to ripple with barely contained power. Both possessed the distinctive features that marked them as members of Rose's maternal family: red hair and emerald eyes. Charlotte, Rose's aunt and the Empire's archmage, hovered with magnificent red hair streaming behind her like liquid fire, her emerald eyes blazing with fury that made the air itself seem to burn. Her magical aura manifested as living flames that took the shapes of mythical creatures, phoenixes, dragons, and other beings of legend that existed at the intersection of life and death magic. Facing her was Evelyn, Rose's mother and Pope of the Order of Fallen Flame, whose darker shades of red hair and deeper emerald eyes reflected the corruption that had transformed her from protective mother into humanity's enemy. Her magical presence manifested as a garden of impossible beauty. Flowers that bloomed with colors that shouldn't exist, vines that moved with predatory intelligence, and trees whose roots extended into dimensions that mortal minds couldn't comprehend. The battle between them was reshaping the landscape of Avalon City with each exchange of power. Charlotte's purification flames met Evelyn's corrupted nature magic in collisions that sent shockwaves through both the physical and magical planes of existence. "Get them out of the city," Charlotte's voice echoed directly in their minds, her mental communication cutting through the chaos with crystalline clarity. The evacuation has already begun, but the Order's assault is more comprehensive than we anticipated. Through the gaping hole in the building, they could see the full scope of the catastrophe unfolding across Avalon City. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers throughout the urban landscape as the Order of Fallen Flames agents attacked everything from government buildings to civilian infrastructure. Military response teams were engaging hostile forces in aerial combat that painted the sky with competing colors of magical energy. The entire city, Arya whispered with obvious shock, as she took in the scale of destruction visible from their vantage point. They're attacking everything at once. Coordinated assault, Serafina confirmed with military precision, her strategic mind immediately grasping the implications of what they were witnessing. This isn't just about Arthur's trial or even capturing Luna. This is a full-scale attempt to decapitate the Empire's leadership while the government is distracted by legal proceedings. Emergency evacuation alarms were blaring throughout the city as civilian populations received automated instructions to seek shelter or flee toward designated safe zones. The advanced magical technological infrastructure that made Avalon City one of the most sophisticated urban centers in the world was being systematically targeted by forces that seemed to understand exactly which systems needed to be disrupted to create maximum chaos. "We need to move," Rachel said with Saintess authority, her training immediately shifting focus from the larger battle to the immediate responsibility of protecting the people under her care. The Guild's emergency protocols should include transportation to secure locations outside the city. Cecilia was already coordinating with Elias through her communication device, her royal training allowing her to maintain tactical thinking despite the overwhelming nature of the crisis. Imperial safe houses are compromised. The Order clearly has intelligence about our defensive preparations. We need alternative options. The Northern Embassy, Rose suggested as another explosion rocked the building around them. The embassies are heavily fortified and could offer some protection. As they prepared to implement whatever evacuation plan could be assembled under such chaotic conditions, Reka moved to shelter Stella with astral energy barriers while Arthur's parents stayed close to their daughter Arya. Above them, the battle between Charlotte and Evelyn intensified as each woman drew upon powers that could reshape continents if left unchecked. The Archmage's mana met the Pope's miasma in exchanges that sent ripples through reality itself, while around them, the Order of Fallen Flames' full assault continued to tear apart everything Arthur had worked to build and protect. The real war had begun. Quinn Slatemark lifted his palm toward the ceiling, and the world responded. Mana surged from his body in a great tide, saturating the air like the onset of a storm. His gift activated instantly Mage's Flow, and with it came the cloak. Not a literal cloak. No. It was the kind of supernatural mantle that shimmered behind his back like a second spine made of starlight and arcane will. To anyone watching, it would look elegant. To anyone else of radiant rank or below, it was a message. He wasn't in the mood to negotiate. They dare, Quinn thought, his expression set in granite, to attack the Empire with insects and sermons. The first spell was almost lazy, a flick of the wrist. And yet the air screamed as the mana lanced out. Priests and bishops evaporated mid-chant, vanishing in puffs of red mist and shredded scripture. Only the cardinals held barely, raising layers of defensive spells and blessings just in time. They had 3 seconds. Quinn was already building the next spell. This one had weight, the kind of weight you feel in your bones before your brain catches up. Symbols formed in the air, tracing ancient paths through space as runes glowed like slow-moving comets. 9-circle spell, Absolute Field. His gift wove through it, amplifying every strand of energy until space itself buckled under the strain. His mana filled the entire cathedral hall, reshaping the world in his image. The floor cracked. The sky above flickered between colors it had no business showing. The cultists, cardinals or not, were already doomed. And then a sword swung. It wasn't heralded by fanfare or spell circles. It came without noise, without heat, without anything to suggest the heavens were about to be humbled. Just a swing. Simple, almost boring. Except Quinn's soul screamed. He didn't see the sword so much as he felt its path. a sliver of stillness that cut across the chaos. It sliced through his spell as if it were butter left in the sun. His absolute field, his great spell, his masterpiece, collapsed in two. Quinn didn't move, couldn't move. His body remembered something his pride had tried to forget. The sensation of loss, of being outmatched, of falling. 10 years ago, Magnus Drakkar, the Martial King, had used a similar swing. But this wasn't the Martial King. No, this was something worse. Quinn's crimson eyes lifted toward the source. The figure landed lightly among the ruins of the obliterated cultists, ignoring their corpses like one might step over firewood. His hair was white, skin pale. Miasma coiled around him, thick and sentient, and his sword, it drank light. Two horns jutted from his forehead, curved and wicked. A demon, not some corrupted foot soldier, not a half-summoned wraith given flesh. A duke. Quinn's mind raced. A demon duke summoned in the heart of the Slatemark Empire? That was more than reckless. That was war. How? He whispered aloud, more to the choking air than anyone present. How did that damned cult summon a demon duke to Earth? There was no answer, only the sound of footsteps, steady and slow, walking over the bones of the faithful. Quinn extended his magical senses, probing the creature's power signature with the caution of a man defusing a bomb. What he found made his blood run cold in ways that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with tactical analysis. Low radiant rank, the same as Quinn himself. But that couldn't be right. The sheer presence radiating from the demon, the way it had casually obliterated his 9-circle spell, the predatory confidence in every movement. All of it screamed of power that should be impossible at such a rank. Impossible, Quinn breathed, even as he began weaving defensive barriers around himself. How are you? Predictable. The demon's voice was like grinding stone, each syllable dripping with boredom that made the air itself recoil. You humans always mistake complexity for power. Always believe that elaborate spells will save you. The demon raised its sword, a blade that seemed to exist in the spaces between reality, and Quinn felt the temperature of the chamber drop by 20 degrees. I am Vorthak, the demon continued, its pale eyes studying Quinn like a predator examining prey. Duke of Pride, keeper of the hungering blade. You are underwhelming. Bold words for something that crawled out of a summoning circle, Quinn replied, though he was already calculating his options. His imperial pride demanded a response, but his tactical mind was screaming warnings. Vorthak shrugged, a gesture so casual it was insulting. Your reputation preceded you, Emperor. I expected more. The demon moved, not with explosive speed but with deliberate, measured steps. Each footfall cracked the stone beneath, and Quinn could feel reality bending slightly around the creature's presence. Quinn's first defensive spell, a barrier of crystallized mana that could stop artillery shells, held for exactly 2 seconds before spiderwebbing under the demon's casual sword strike. His second layer of protection lasted longer, forcing Vorthak to actually put effort into his swing. The third barrier made the demon pause. Better, Vorthak said with mild approval, but still insufficient. He shattered it with a concentrated burst of dark energy, and Quinn was forced to leap backward, already weaving his next spell. Quinn launched a series of precise strikes. Not his most powerful magic, but quick, efficient spells designed to test his opponent's defenses. Fire lances, crystalline projectiles, waves of pure force. You're skilled, the demon admitted, parrying a particularly well-aimed spell. For a human, but skill alone won't bridge the gap between us. Quinn grimaced and began building something more substantial. A 7-circle spell this time, pouring more of his mana into the construct. The air around him began to distort as energy gathered. Vorthak watched with mild interest. Ah, now you're trying. Good. The spell completed. A lance of imperial fire that could pierce mountain stone, and Quinn released it with surgical precision. Vorthak swung his sword to meet it. The collision sent shockwaves through the ruined cathedral. Quinn's spell held for a moment, pushing against the demon's blade, before being slowly, inexorably cut apart. but it took Vorthak several seconds of concentrated effort. Much better, the demon said, and for the first time he wasn't smiling. You might actually be worth the energy to kill properly. Quinn's mind raced. He could hurt this creature, force it to take him seriously, but he couldn't win. Every exchange made that clearer. The demon was stronger, faster, and more efficient with his power. I need backup, Quinn realized with crystalline clarity. I can't take this thing alone. Vorthak raised his sword, dark energy coiling around the blade like liquid shadow. Shall we end this dance, little emperor? Then the world exploded with astral light. The energy burst struck Vorthak from behind, forcing him to spin and raise his sword in defense. The demon's feet slid backward across the shattered floor, and for the first time since his arrival, he looked genuinely engaged. Quinn turned toward the source of the intervention and felt a mixture of relief and frustration. Archduke Leopold Astorius strode through the ruined entrance, astral energy crackling around him like controlled lightning. His distinguished features were set in grim determination, and his usually immaculate appearance showed signs of recent combat. Torn fabric, singed edges, and the kind of controlled fury that came from fighting for one's life. Your Imperial Majesty, Leopold said with formal courtesy that couldn't quite hide his breathlessness. I apologize for the delay. The capital is complicated at the moment. Quinn grimaced. Of all the people who could have arrived to save his life, it had to be Leopold Astoria. Archduke, Quinn replied with equally formal courtesy. Your timing is appreciated. Leopold's astral energy flared brighter as he studied their demonic opponent. A duke. How unfortunate. I had hoped we were dealing with lesser manifestations. Vorthak straightened from his defensive stance, pale eyes moving between the two radiant rankers with something that looked suspiciously like anticipation. The boredom in his expression was gone, replaced by genuine interest. Ah, the demon said, rolling his shoulders as if warming up. Now this is more like it. Quinn and Leopold exchanged a quick glance, Emperor and Archduke putting aside personal differences in the face of immediate mortal peril. They had fought alongside each other before, during the border conflicts of Quinn's early reign, and despite their political tensions, they both understood the necessity of coordination. Two radiant rancors, Vorthak continued, his grip shifting on his sword. Finally, something that might actually be worth the journey to this miserable realm. Standard formation? Leopold asked quietly, astral energy already beginning to weave into complex patterns around his hands. Standard formation, Quinn confirmed, his own mana surging as he prepared his most powerful spells. Vorthak smiled, revealing teeth like broken obsidian. Yes, this should finally be entertaining. The demon raised his sword, and Quinn could feel the difference immediately. Where before Vorthak had been toying with him, now the creature's power flared with genuine intent. The real battle began. As soon as Luna's revelation shattered the stunned silence of the tribunal chamber, the world exploded into chaos around me. The first explosion sent shockwaves through the ancient stone walls, and I knew with crystalline certainty that this had all been orchestrated. I sprinted from the defendant's table as debris rained down from the ceiling, my body moving on pure instinct even as my mind raced to process the magnitude of what was happening. The tribunal chamber's defensive barriers, wards that had protected imperial proceedings for centuries, cracked like glass under forces that shouldn't exist in normal reality. Luna's adult form flickered and vanished as the strain of maintaining her manifestation hit me like a physical blow. My sword heart hammered against my ribs as the toll of sustaining her revelation without her power coursing through me became apparent. Even that brief display had pushed my current capabilities to their absolute limits. Grandmaster! A flash of pure astral energy sliced through the air beside me, and the suppression cuffs that had bound my magical abilities for days simply disintegrated. I turned to see an Imperial Knight in full combat gear, his face grim behind his helmet's visor. Without a word, he tossed my spatial ring through the chaos. Somehow, impossibly, they had prepared for this exact scenario. Go, he said simply, raising his weapon as a group of hooded figures burst through the chamber's main entrance. "We'll hold them as long as we can." I caught the ring and felt the familiar weight of access to my equipment settle back into my soul. Finally, the suppression that had made me feel half-blind and powerless lifted like fog before sunrise, and my full magical capabilities flooded back through my system with overwhelming intensity. My sword materialized in my right hand, the blade that had been crafted specifically for my techniques, its metal singing with contained astral energy. The familiar weight of my combat armor settled around my torso, and Seraphim's embrace boosted my senses as the ancient-grade artifacts recognized their wielder and activated automatically. Both of my gifts flared to life simultaneously. My enhanced physical capabilities merged with spatial awareness that transformed the chaotic battlefield into a three-dimensional map of threats and opportunities. Every enemy position, every trajectory of incoming attacks, every possible escape route crystallized in my consciousness with tactical precision. "Arthur, you need to run." Luna's voice echoed urgently in my mind, carrying an undertone of fear that I had never heard from her before. "The power signature I'm sensing, it's not just cultists. There's something else here, something much more dangerous." I followed her implied direction and felt my blood run cold. Through the gaps in the crumbling chamber walls, I could see Emperor Quinn engaged in combat with something that made every instinct I possessed scream warnings about immediate mortal peril. A demon. Not some corrupted human or summoned familiar, but an actual demon. The creature moved with predatory grace that made Quinn's imperial combat magic look clumsy by comparison, its blade cutting through the Emperor's defensive spells like they were constructed from paper and wishful thinking. A demon duke. The realization hit me with the weight of absolute certainty. This wasn't just some random incursion. The Order had somehow managed to summon one of the greater demons to Earth, and it was systematically dismantling one of the most powerful humans alive. "How dare they?" Luna snarled, her voice carrying harmonics of rage that made the air around me vibrate with barely contained fury. Through our bond, I could feel echoes of ancient pain, memories of battles fought millennia ago, of losses that had shaped the very foundations of her existence. The presence of demonic forces in this realm was more than just tactically problematic for her. It was personally offensive on a level that transcended rational thought. "Not now, Luna," I reminded her as gently as possible while dodging a blast of miasma that turned the stone floor where I had been standing into a crater of twisted metal and melted rock. "Despite everything we've built, we're still nowhere near strong enough to face something like that." Her agreement came with reluctant acknowledgement of our limitations, though I could still feel the pure hatred radiating through our connection. The demon's presence was like a constant itch she couldn't scratch, a wrong that demanded correction but currently lay beyond our power to address. My blade erupted with astral energy as I charged toward the nearest group of cultists, my enhanced speed carrying me across the battle-torn chamber in heartbeats. Priests fell before me like wheat before a scythe, their protective wards and defensive spells simply inadequate against my power properly applied. The bishops presented more of a challenge, their magical training evident in how they coordinated their attacks and supported each other's defensive positions. But even their enhanced capabilities felt manageable compared to the existential threat represented by the demon currently toying with the Emperor of the Slatemark Empire. One bishop separated herself from the group, her spear beginning to glow with the kind of corrupted astral energy that spoke to training from sources that violated every principle of legitimate magical education. Her spear heart's rhythm was visible through her enhanced aura, fast, aggressive, designed for overwhelming offense rather than sustainable combat. She thrust forward with technique that would have been impressive under normal circumstances, miasmic energy coating her weapon in patterns that made the air itself recoil from contact. But she had made the critical error of facing someone whose capabilities operated on an entirely different level. I prepared my response with the kind of calm precision that came from years of training under Luna's guidance. The first movement of my Grade 6 art, God Flash. Pure light coated my sword in layers of concentrated radiance that seemed to burn away the very darkness surrounding us. My divine miracle, Aureate, activated at full intensity, transforming my movements into something approaching divine intervention made manifest. Valeria, my bone symbiote, stirred to full consciousness within my skeletal structure, her presence boosting my physical capabilities while providing the kind of intimate coordination that no external equipment could match. Master, Valeria's voice whispered through my consciousness, her power flowing through my bones like liquid starlight. The deep dark and pure light energies that could have torn me apart from within were held in perfect balance by lucent harmony, creating a synthesis that multiplied rather than merely added my various capabilities. My speed transcended anything purely human as I flowed around the bishop's spear thrust like water around stone. The God Flash technique carrying me past her defenses and through her protective wards as if they simply didn't exist. My blade found its target with surgical precision, ending her threat in a single, perfectly executed strike. But I couldn't afford to pause for even a moment. The wings of Eclipse spread from my shoulders, each dark feather responding to my will as I used them to redirect my momentum and avoid the incoming spells from her companions. Featherstep carried me through patterns of movement that made targeting me nearly impossible, while Space Magic provided short-range teleportation that kept me consistently where my enemies least expected. Through the chaos, I caught sight of my objective, the emergency exit that would lead me out of the palace and toward where my family was hopefully taking shelter. But between me and that goal, I could see Jack Blazespout cutting through the Imperial Knights who had tried to intercept him, his own peak Ascendant rank abilities proving more than adequate for dealing with soldiers trained for conventional threats. He moved with the kind of focused intensity that spoke to personal rather than merely strategic motivation. This wasn't just about completing the Order's mission. He was coming for me specifically, and the fury in his expression suggested that Luna's revelation had shattered whatever careful emotional control he had maintained throughout his long deception. I gathered astral energy for what would probably be a futile attempt to fight him off when the sharp crack of a gunshot cut through the ambient noise of magical combat. The magic bullet, crafted from materials that could harm peak Ascendant rank targets, struck Jack squarely in the chest and sent him tumbling backward through the air like a discarded toy. "Go," Commander Matthias said as he materialized beside me, his peak immortal rank power radiating authority that made even the chaos around us seem temporarily manageable. The twin revolvers in his hands were clearly artifacts of significant potency, their barrels still smoking from the shot that had just saved my life. I recognized him immediately, the same Imperial officer who had helped me during my first major crisis 4 years ago, when political necessity had forced me to navigate dangers I hadn't fully understood. His presence here felt like divine intervention, though I suspected it was actually careful planning on the part of people who had been anticipating exactly this kind of emergency. His covering fire cleared a path through the remaining cultists between me and the exit, each shot precise enough to disable threats without unnecessary collateral damage to the palace structure or civilian nobles still trapped in the combat zone. I sprinted for the final warp gate, my enhanced speed carrying me across the remaining distance while Matthias held off pursuit with the kind of professional competence that reminded me why the Imperial military commanded respect throughout the known world. The spatial magic activated under my hands, reality bending to create a passage that would carry me away from this battlefield and toward whatever slim hope remained of protecting the people who mattered most to me. The warp gate deposited me onto a rooftop 3 kilometers from the Imperial Palace, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. Acrid smoke mixed with the metallic tang of spilled blood and the ozone scent of massive magical discharge. The second thing was the scope of absolute devastation sprawling across Avalon City like a festering wound. From my elevated position, I could see the Order of Fallen Flames assault wasn't just targeting government buildings. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers throughout the urban landscape, their orange and crimson light painting the afternoon sky in shades of apocalypse. Military hover vehicles streaked between skyscrapers in aerial dogfights that left contrails of various colored magical energy, while emergency sirens wailed from every direction with the desperate urgency of a civilization under siege. But it was the massive spatial distortion hanging like a wound in reality above the city center that made my blood run cold with recognition and dread. The domain battle was invisible to most observers, existing in a pocket dimension that overlay normal space without directly affecting it. But for someone with my enhanced magical senses, the presence of 2 low radiant rankers locked in mortal combat created pressure waves that rippled through multiple planes of existence simultaneously. Charlotte Alaric, the Empire's Archmage, was fighting her own sister in a domain where the laws of physics bent to accommodate powers that could reshape continents. I couldn't see the battle directly, but the magical resonance told me everything I needed to know about the scope of destruction occurring in that isolated pocket of reality. Evelyn Alaric, Rose's mother, Pope of the Order of Fallen Flame, had challenged her sister to domain combat, ensuring that their confrontation wouldn't accidentally level half the capital city. It was a small mercy that spoke to tactical awareness rather than humanitarian concern, but it meant that the Order forces operating throughout Avalon weren't being disrupted by collateral damage from a Radiant rank duel. The spatial distortion pulsed with each exchange of power, creating pressure waves that made the air itself vibrate with barely contained energy. My enhanced awareness could feel the domain's boundaries straining under the force of their conflict, while reality flickered at the edges where the pocket dimension intersected with normal space. My communication device buzzed with an emergency signal, and Elias's voice cut through the ambient chaos with professional efficiency that somehow made the crisis feel marginally more manageable. "Sir, the family evacuation convoy is currently moving through Sector 7 toward the Northern Continent Embassy," he reported. His words clipped with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested he was coordinating multiple emergency operations simultaneously. Order forces are conducting intercept operations along the primary evacuation routes. Estimated arrival at your position in 12 minutes if current speed maintained. 12 minutes. I could see from my vantage point that Sector 7 was currently hosting its own localized war as Imperial forces attempted to maintain evacuation corridors while Order operatives targeted civilian convoys with systematic precision. Explosions sent pillars of smoke into the afternoon sky, while the distinctive whine of military-grade magical weapons provided a constant underlying soundtrack to the urban battle. My enhanced spatial awareness, boosted by my recently reactivated gifts, painted a three-dimensional map of threats and opportunities across the cityscape below. Order forces were moving in coordinated groups, their black combat gear making them difficult to spot among the rubble and smoke, but their magical signatures blazed like beacons to anyone with the sensory capabilities to detect them. I activated Wings of Eclipse and launched myself from the rooftop. Dark feathers spread wide as I glided between buildings while using Featherstep to adjust my trajectory around incoming magical projectiles. The city rushed past below me in a blur of damaged architecture and fleeing civilians, emergency vehicles weaving between abandoned cars as automated evacuation announcements echoed from public address systems throughout the urban landscape. All citizens proceed immediately to designated shelter points. The mechanical voice repeated with tireless efficiency. Military forces are responding to the current emergency. Remain calm and follow evacuation protocols. The irony of automated systems maintaining their programming while the world burned around them would have been amusing under different circumstances. Instead, it served as a reminder of how quickly civilization's facade could crumble when faced with forces that operated outside the comfortable boundaries of law and order. Above me, the domain battle's pressure waves created visible distortions in the atmosphere, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Each pulse reminded me that while Charlotte and Evelyn fought in isolation, their confrontation would determine the fate of everyone below. If Charlotte fell, the Order would have eliminated the Empire's most powerful defender. If Evelyn was defeated, the assault on Avalon would lose its most dangerous coordinator. I spotted the convoy before they spotted me. A cluster of armored vehicles moving through streets that had been cleared by advanced security teams, their route protected by Imperial Knights whose magical barriers deflected the worst of the Order's harassment attacks. The vehicles themselves were state-of-the-art. Adaptive armor that could withstand military-grade magical assault, communication systems that maintained contact even under heavy interference, and emergency medical facilities that could handle anything short of fatal injuries. But even with their advanced defensive capabilities, I could see that the convoy was under increasing pressure. Order operatives were using the urban environment to their advantage, launching attacks from concealed positions before melting back into the chaos of the burning city. Each assault forced the convoy to slow down, making them increasingly vulnerable to more concentrated attacks. A group of robed figures emerged from a damaged shopping complex ahead of the convoy's route, their magical signatures identifying them as bishops. They began weaving spells that would turn the street itself into a trap, corrupting the asphalt and concrete with miasma that would poison anyone who came into contact with it. I dove from my gliding trajectory, switching to direct combat as my sword materialized in my right hand. The ancient-grade artifacts responded to my will with perfect synchronization, while both gifts flared to maximum intensity as I prepared to clear the path for my family's escape. The first bishop died before he realized I was there, my blade cutting through his defensive wards like they were constructed from wishful thinking rather than properly anchored magical energy. The second managed to raise a barrier of corrupted earth that slowed my attack long enough for him to scream a warning to his companions. The remaining 3 bishops spread out with tactical precision that spoke to proper military training rather than mere magical education. They moved to flank me while maintaining coordinated spellcasting that would have overwhelmed most opponents. Unfortunately for them, I was no longer operating under normal limitations. I teleported behind their formation while simultaneously manifesting astral wings that blocked their line of sight, using the momentary confusion to eliminate 2 more cardinals with surgical precision. The final bishop attempted to flee, but Wings of Eclipse allowed me to pursue him through the air while raining down attacks that demolished his defensive positions. He fell among the rubble of what had once been a luxury retail establishment, his death ensuring that the convoy's path remained clear. The lead vehicle's communication system crackled to life as I landed nearby, and Rose's voice cut through the static with obvious relief. "Arthur, thank God you're alive. We saw the palace on the news feeds. The entire structure looked like it was collapsing." "I'm fine," I replied, though the sight of my family crowded into the armored transport made me acutely aware of how close I had come to losing everything that mattered to me. "What's the current plan?" "Northern Continent Embassy," Cecilia answered with royal authority that cut through the ambient chaos. "Ambassador Helena confirmed they have defensive capabilities that can withstand sustained assault, and the building's magical shields are independently powered." Through the vehicle's reinforced windows, I could see Stella pressed against the glass with wide eyes that reflected both fear and excitement. Arya sat beside our parents, her face pale but determined, while Rachel and Serafina flanked Reka in protective formations that spoke to their combat training. But it was Alara's expression that caught my attention and sent a chill down my spine. Her violet eyes held the kind of resolved determination that I had learned to associate with dangerous self-sacrifice. "The embassy's medical facilities," she said quietly. "They'll need every healer available once the injured start arriving. I should stay and help coordinate triage operations." "Absolutely not," I replied with finality that made several people in the convoy look up sharply. "You're staying with the group until this crisis is resolved." The Northern Continent Embassy's defensive barriers shimmered like aurora light as our convoy approached the imposing structure that represented one of the few truly secure locations remaining in Avalon City. The building itself was a masterpiece of defensive architecture. Crystalline walls, magical shields that drew power from the Northern Continent's own ley lines, and emergency protocols that had been designed by the most paranoid military minds in human civilization. But as we pulled into the embassy's secure courtyard, I could see that we weren't the only ones who had thought of this sanctuary. "Daddy?" Stella said from her position pressed against the vehicle's reinforced window, her 9-year-old voice carrying the kind of innocent observation that cut straight through adult pretenses. "Why are all those people running toward the building? They look really scared." She was right. The embassy's main entrance was crowded with refugees. Noble families, government officials, foreign dignitaries, and civilians who had managed to reach the sanctuary through the chaos consuming the rest of the city. The scene reminded me uncomfortably of historical images from wars I had only read about in books. "Because this is one of the safest places in the city right now, sweetheart," I replied, reaching over to ruffle her dark hair while trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "The Northern Embassy has very strong defenses that can protect everyone inside." My father looked up from the tactical display he had been studying on his personal tablet, his business-trained mind clearly working through the logistical implications of what we were witnessing. "Arthur, if this many people are converging on the same location, it's going to become a target. Basic strategic thinking, the Order will know where to find the largest concentration of high-value individuals. Douglas Nightingale had always possessed the kind of practical intelligence that made him successful in both business and crisis management. His observation carried the weight of someone who understood how enemies thought about resource allocation and target prioritization. "He's right," Alice added, her maternal instincts clearly warring with her recognition of tactical necessities. "But where else can we go? The guild headquarters is compromised. The imperial safe houses are under attack, and most of the city's defensive infrastructure has been systematically targeted." Through the communication system, I could hear updates from various imperial forces throughout Avalon. The reports painted a picture of coordinated assault that had clearly been planned for months, if not years. The Order wasn't just attacking random targets. They were systematically dismantling the Empire's ability to coordinate effective resistance. "Arthur," Arya said with the kind of serious tone that reminded me my little sister had grown into a remarkably perceptive young woman. "The news feeds are showing similar attacks in other major cities. This isn't just about Avalon, is it? They're trying to decapitate the entire Empire's leadership structure simultaneously." Before I could respond to her disturbingly accurate assessment, the convoy's defensive alarms activated with urgent tones that made everyone immediately alert. Through the vehicle's enhanced sensor systems, I could see magical signatures approaching the embassy from multiple directions, Order forces moving with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested they had been planning this assault on our sanctuary from the beginning. "Everyone out, now," I commanded, opening the transport's doors while my enhanced senses catalogued the approaching threats. "Rose, Cecilia, can you establish defensive perimeters? Rachel, Serafina, I need you coordinating evacuation of civilians into the embassy's secure areas." The 6 women who had agreed to share my complicated life moved with practiced efficiency that demonstrated their individual capabilities rather than mere dependence on my protection. Rose's necromantic abilities manifested as barriers of living shadow that could absorb incoming magical attacks, while Cecilia's imperial flame magic created overlapping defensive layers that would challenge even cardinal-level opponents. Rachel's Saintess training became immediately apparent as she began coordinating with embassy security to establish triage areas for incoming wounded, her natural authority making Imperial guards accept her direction without question. Serafina's ice crystal techniques created additional defensive positions, while Reika's violet energy shields provided mobile protection for civilian groups. "Daddy, what can I do to help?" Stella asked with the kind of earnest determination that made my chest tighten with protective instincts. "You can help by staying close to Grandma and Grandpa," I replied, kneeling down to meet her eyes directly, "and by being brave for all the other people who are scared right now. Sometimes the most important job is just showing others that everything is going to be okay." Stella nodded with the serious expression she wore when processing instructions she considered important. "Like when you told me that being strong isn't just about fighting, but about protecting people and making them feel safe?" "Exactly like that," I confirmed, pulling her into a quick hug that helped center my own emotional state. "You're already doing that job perfectly." But even as I tried to project confidence for my family, my enhanced senses were detecting the approaching Order forces with growing concern. These weren't just random assault troops. The magical signatures indicated bishops and cardinals, with at least 2 groups moving to surround the embassy from different directions. The first attack came as a coordinated barrage of corrupted energy that tested the embassy's defensive barriers with surgical precision. Each spell was placed to probe for weaknesses rather than simply overwhelming the structure through brute force, suggesting that whoever was coordinating this assault possessed detailed intelligence about the building's defensive capabilities. "Arthur?" my mother called out as explosions began lighting up the embassy's perimeter. "Should we be moving inside now?" "Yes," I replied, though my attention was already shifting to combat preparations. "Everyone into the embassy's main hall. The building's internal defenses are stronger than the perimeter barriers." But as our group moved toward the embassy's entrance, a section of the defensive wall simply vanished, not destroyed by explosion, but erased by magic that rewrote the fundamental structure of matter itself. Through the gap, hooded figures in black combat gear poured into the courtyard with tactical precision that spoke to proper military training. I counted 6 bishops and 3 cardinals, their formation designed to overwhelm the embassy's defenses while minimizing their exposure to counterattack. The bishops moved to engage the building's automated defensive systems while the cardinals prepared spells that could breach the structure's magical barriers. My sword materialized in my right hand as I stepped forward to intercept them, but I found myself flanked by Rose and Cecilia as they moved into supporting positions. "We're not letting you face them alone," Rose said with businesslike determination, her necromantic abilities manifesting as protective barriers around our family group. "These are our people too." Cecilia's imperial flames flared with royal authority as she prepared her own attack spells. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't do anything stupidly heroic that gets you killed." The first bishop charged toward our position with a spear crackling with corrupted energy, his technique suggesting formal military training enhanced by order indoctrination. I met his spear thrust with my blade while Rose's shadows struck him from the side, disrupting his defensive positioning just enough for Cecilia's flames to find their target. The bishop fell with the kind of efficiency that spoke to proper teamwork rather than individual dominance. But the remaining 8 opponents spread out with tactical awareness that forced us to divide our attention. 2 cardinals moved to flank our position while the other 5 bishops engaged the embassy's defensive systems with spells designed to disable rather than destroy. "They're trying to capture the building intact," I realized with growing alarm. "This isn't just an attack. They're planning to take hostages." Above us, the domain battle's pressure waves intensified as Charlotte and Evelyn's conflict reached new levels of intensity. Each pulse reminded me that our local situation was just one small part of a much larger war being fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. "Arthur," Arya called out from her position near the embassy entrance. "The news feeds are showing order forces surrounding multiple embassies throughout the city. I think they're trying to capture all the foreign diplomatic personnel." The implications hit me like a physical blow. The order wasn't just trying to destabilize the empire. They were planning to hold representatives from every major continental power as leverage for whatever larger objectives they were pursuing. A cardinal stepped forward with obvious confidence, his magical aura identifying him as someone accustomed to command authority. "Surrender now, and your families will be treated with appropriate consideration. Continue to resist, and we cannot guarantee their safety." The screaming reached me before I could see the source. Millions of voices crying out in pain and terror, a symphony of suffering that stretched across the entire horizon as far as my eyes could see. As we emerged from the underground tunnels into what should have been a safe evacuation zone, the scene that greeted me was worse than anything I had imagined during our desperate flight through the city. Bodies lay scattered across the massive plaza like broken dolls, their blood painting abstract patterns that spoke to the order's systematic cruelty. But this wasn't just one evacuation point. Through the smoke and flames, I could see similar devastation extending throughout the entire district. Avalon City, home to 30 million souls, was being systematically butchered. These weren't soldiers or fighters. They were families, children, elderly citizens who had followed evacuation protocols and trusted that someone would protect them. The order had targeted them specifically because they represented everything pure and innocent that my world still contained. "Alara, we need to keep moving," Arthur said urgently, his hand on my arm as he tried to guide me toward the temporary medical stations that Imperial forces had established at the plaza's edge. "The area isn't secure yet." But I couldn't move, couldn't look away from the endless sea of suffering that stretched beyond the horizon. My healing senses were overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of death and dying, millions of people across the city crying out for help that would never come. I had always known the world contained cruelty. Despite what people assumed about my sheltered upbringing, I wasn't blind to the realities of political conflict or the capacity for evil that existed in human hearts. But knowing something intellectually and witnessing genocide in real time were entirely different experiences. "There are so many," I whispered, my healing senses automatically cataloging the extent of injuries around us. The numbers were incomprehensible: millions wounded, millions more dying, across every district of the greatest city in human civilization. Rachel appeared beside us, her Saintess training evident in how she moved through the carnage with practiced efficiency. "The medical teams are completely overwhelmed," she reported with professional calm that couldn't quite hide her own horror. "We're looking at casualties in the millions. The infrastructure can't handle anything approaching this scale." Elara, came a voice from behind us that made Arthur's entire demeanor shift to immediate hostility. I turned to see Jack Blazespout approaching through the medical chaos, and Arthur immediately stepped between us with his hand on his sword hilt. "You?" Arthur snarled with cold fury that made the air around him crackle with astral energy. "You're responsible for this. Every single death tonight is on your hands." Jack stopped walking, his usual charming mask replaced by something colder and more honest. "Perhaps," he said with casual indifference that made Arthur's fury deepen. "Though I'd hardly call it my responsibility alone. The Order has many hands." "Jack," I said softly, studying his face with growing understanding. "You're with them, aren't you? You've been lying to all of us this entire time." "Lying is such a harsh word," Jack replied with the kind of cold amusement that sent chills down my spine. "I prefer to think of it as playing a longer game than most people understand." "Get away from her," Arthur commanded, astral energy beginning to manifest around him as his protective instincts overwhelmed his strategic thinking. "Whatever you're planning, it ends now." Jack's dark eyes moved to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm not planning anything, Arthur. The night's work is already complete." Around us, the screaming continued as millions of people across Avalon City faced death or worse. The numbers were so vast that my mind could barely process them. An entire civilization being systematically destroyed while we stood here with its architect. I could save them. Not all of them, that was beyond any individual's power. But I could save millions. The mass healing technique that Papa had shown me in theoretical texts, the forbidden method that could channel life force through magical amplification to restore countless subjects simultaneously. "I've been naive about so many things," I said, thinking of all my theories about preventing conflict through understanding and compassion. "But I understand this. Some sacrifices are worth making." Before either of them could respond, I moved toward the center of the plaza where the concentration of wounded was heaviest. My healing abilities activated automatically, magical senses reaching out to touch not just the hundreds here, but the millions suffering across the entire city. "Elara, stop!" Arthur called out, understanding immediately what I was planning. "That technique will kill you." "I know," I replied with serene acceptance, my hands already glowing with therapeutic energy as I began channeling my life force into a mass healing array that encompassed the entire city. "But millions of people will live. Children will go home to their parents. Families will be reunited." Rachel appeared beside me, her Saintess training allowing her to recognize the scope of what I was attempting. "Elara, this is impossible. The scale you're attempting. It's never been done before." "Then I'll be the first," I said softly, feeling my vital energy begin to flow outward in patterns that touched every injured person within Avalon's city limits. The healing light spread from my position like ripples in an ocean, growing brighter and more encompassing as it reached across districts and through entire neighborhoods. I could feel millions of people beginning to respond to the restoration magic, their wounds closing and their pain fading as my life force became theirs. As the technique reached its peak and my consciousness began to fade, I noticed something that made my heart ache with sudden understanding. Jack was moving toward me. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the kind of unconscious step forward that spoke to instincts beyond rational thought. His carefully controlled expression had cracked just slightly, revealing something that looked remarkably like anguish as he watched my life force burn away to save the people his order had tried to destroy. Arthur was shouting something, reaching for me with desperate hands, but Jack's movement was different, quieter, like he wanted to comfort rather than save, to be close rather than to act. In that moment, I understood. He did care about me, not for political reasons, not as part of some elaborate scheme, but genuinely. The realization was both heartbreaking and strangely comforting. Even someone capable of such evil could be touched by something pure. "I'm sorry, Jack," I whispered, though I doubted he could hear me over Arthur's anguished calls. "I'm sorry for whatever pain this causes you." Through the growing radiance, I could see Luna materializing beside Arthur, her ancient eyes wide with something that looked remarkably like reverence. "Arthur," I heard her whisper, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke to profound recognition. This soul, in all my millennia of existence, across countless civilizations and species, I have never witnessed such brilliance, such perfect, selfless radiance. She's saving millions of people with her sacrifice. Papa is going to be worried about me, I whispered as my consciousness began to fade, thinking of the man who had supported every one of my dreams. The last thing I saw was Jack's face, his mask finally gone completely, revealing grief so profound it seemed to encompass the destruction of everything beautiful he had ever known. Millions of people would live tonight because I had chosen to burn like a star, brilliant, brief, and beautiful enough to illuminate an entire civilization. It was more than enough. The light faded from Alara's eyes like the last ember of a dying star, and something fundamental broke inside my chest. I knelt beside her motionless form, my hands still glowing with residual healing energy that had proven utterly inadequate when it mattered most. Her face held perfect peace, as if she had simply chosen to sleep after completing the most important work of her life. Around us, the golden radiance of her sacrifice continued to spread across Avalon City, carrying restoration to millions of people who would never know the name of their savior. "Alara?" I whispered, my voice cracking despite every attempt to maintain composure. "You magnificent, impossible woman." "Arthur?" Luna's voice echoed in my mind with reverence that bordered on worship. In all my millennia guiding civilizations across the cosmos, I have never witnessed a soul of such perfect purity. She burned brighter than stars. Rachel collapsed to her knees beside me, tears streaming down her face as her saintess training crumbled before the reality of losing someone so fundamentally good. "I couldn't save her," she sobbed with the anguish of a healer who had failed at the most crucial moment. "All my power, all my training, and I couldn't do anything." "None of us could," I said softly, reaching out to close Alara's violet eyes with gentle fingers. "She made a choice that transcended what any of us were capable of preventing." Rachel's grief transformed into something approaching religious conviction as she stared at Alara's peaceful expression. "She saved millions of people with her life."
Millions.
"I've been calling myself a saintess, but I'm nothing compared to what she just accomplished." "Rachel!" "No," she interrupted with fierce determination cutting through her tears. "I'm going to be better. I'm going to be worthy of the example she set. Every person I heal from now on will be in honor of what she showed us tonight." The sound of slow applause drew my attention back to Jack, who stood several meters away with an expression I couldn't immediately decipher. His dark eyes were fixed on Alara's form with an intensity that made something cold and furious unfurl in my chest. "Truly magnificent," Jack said with what sounded like genuine appreciation. "I've seen many people die, Arthur, but that was something approaching artistry." The casual tone, as if he were commenting on a particularly well-executed spell rather than the death of the purest soul either of us had ever encountered, ignited fury that transcended rational thought. "You?" I snarled, rising to my feet as astral energy began crackling around me with dangerous intensity. "You did this. Your order, your plans, your evil. All of it led to this moment." Jack's expression didn't change, though something flickered behind his eyes that might have been pain. "The Order's plans were always going to proceed, Arthur. Tonight's tragedy would have happened regardless of my personal involvement." "Shut up," I said with lethal quiet, my hand moving to my sword hilt as killing intent radiated from my position. "Just shut up and fight me." I launched myself at him with speed enhanced by grief and fury, my blade wreathed in pure light as I sought to end the life of the man whose evil had cost the world its brightest light. But Jack was ready for my assault, his own power manifesting as flames that defied every assumption about what should be possible. Nirvana flames erupted from his position, pure white fire that burned with the intensity of stars, each tongue of flame carrying enough power to incinerate peak ascendant rank opponents. But intertwined with that celestial fire were ribbons of abyssal flames, dark purple energy that seemed to devour light rather than producing it. The combination of mana and miasma working in perfect harmony should have been impossible. The opposing forces should have torn each other apart, creating magical feedback that would destroy anyone attempting such integration. Instead, Jack wielded both with the kind of masterful control that spoke to years of dangerous experimentation. "You want to know the truth, Arthur?" Jack asked as our initial exchange sent shockwaves through the ruined plaza. "You want to understand what tonight really cost?" I responded with hollow eclipse, channeling astral energy through my blade while drops of pure deep dark created voids in reality itself. The devastating technique carved through Jack's flame barriers like they were constructed from wishful thinking rather than properly anchored magical energy. But Jack flowed around the attack with fluid grace, his dual flames providing mobility that conventional magic couldn't match. "She was the only good thing in my entire existence," he said with casual honesty that made my fury deepen. "The only proof I ever encountered that purity could exist in this world." "So what?" I roared, switching to my grade 6 arts third movement as Stellar Cascade transformed my sword into a weapon of concentrated stellar energy. "You think your feelings matter? You think loving her gives you some kind of redemption?" "Redemption?" Jack laughed with genuine amusement as he countered my assault with spiraling combinations of both flame types.
"Arthur, I'm irredeemably evil."
"I know exactly what I am. But that doesn't mean I can't recognize beauty when I encounter it." Our battle intensified as we moved through the ruined plaza, each exchange demonstrating the gap that had grown between our capabilities over the years. Jack's mastery of dual flame techniques was impressive, but my combination of enhanced physical abilities and superior magical training allowed me to gradually gain advantage. I pressed my assault with techniques that drew upon every aspect of my development: Nightingale method spellcasting, ancient grade artifacts, Luna's copied abilities, and combat arts refined through years of training. Jack was skilled, but he was still fundamentally human despite his demonic enhancements. "You loved her," I realized with sudden clarity as I drove him backward through coordinated attacks that forced him into increasingly desperate defensive positions. "You actually loved her, and you still chose to participate in her destruction. Love doesn't change what someone is, Arthur," Jack replied while weaving defensive patterns that combined both flame types in ways that violated every principle of magical theory. "I loved her precisely because she represented everything I could never become." "Then you should have protected her," I screamed, my fury reaching levels that transcended rational thought. "You should have found a way to save her instead of enabling the forces that killed her." Jack's response was a desperate combination assault that pushed his dual flames beyond safe limitations, creating a maelstrom of opposing energies that should have torn him apart from within. But his technique held just long enough to force me backward, buying him precious seconds to recover. "Some things are more important than individual desires," he said with bitter honesty, "even when those desires involve the only person who ever made existence feel meaningful." The admission triggered something fundamental within my consciousness. Jack had loved Alara. Genuinely, completely, with the same desperate devotion that had driven me to pursue her in the first place. But where I had tried to protect her, he had chosen his loyalty to evil over his feelings for good. "Then I'll protect the peace she created," I declared with absolute conviction that seemed to resonate through multiple planes of existence. "I'll build the world she died to save, and I'll do it with the strength she gave me." Something clicked in my mind like a lock opening. Not just understanding, but perfect comprehension of truths that had remained theoretical until this moment. The Nightingale Aurora method erupted in my consciousness like a supernova of pure knowledge, eight-circle magical theory unfolding in cascading revelations that rewrote my understanding of reality itself. I could see the mathematical frameworks that governed dimensional space, the harmonic frequencies that bound matter and energy, the delicate balance points where creation and entropy danced in eternal opposition. The knowledge flooded through my mind like liquid starlight, each equation and principle burning itself into my consciousness with perfect clarity. But the mental transformation was nothing compared to what was happening to my body. My bones began to sing, literally sing, as the calcium and marrow restructured themselves at the molecular level. Valeria, my bone symbiote, screamed in ecstatic harmony as her own essence evolved alongside mine, our symbiotic bond deepening into something approaching perfect unity. "Master," she gasped through our connection. I can feel eternity flowing through us. My muscles tore and rebuilt themselves in seconds that felt like hours, each fiber becoming denser and more efficient while remaining outwardly unchanged. My nervous system rewired itself with crackling energy that made my vision explode into spectrums of light I had never imagined possible. I could see magical currents flowing through the air like rivers of liquid rainbow, dimensional boundaries that flickered like heat shimmer, the fundamental geometric patterns that gave structure to space itself. My mana channels expanded explosively, the pathways through which magical energy flowed becoming vast highways capable of channeling forces that would have incinerated my previous body. The sensation was like being struck by lightning while drowning in an ocean of pure power, every cell in my body simultaneously dying and being reborn stronger. The breakthrough to low immortal rank hit me like the birth of a new star. But even that transcendent experience paled before what emerged from the deepest core of my being. My third gift awakened not with gentle warmth, but with the violent beauty of a galaxy being born. The power erupted from somewhere deeper than my soul, deeper than consciousness itself, emerging from the fundamental spark that made me Arthur Nightingale rather than any other person who had ever existed. The moment Arthur smiled, I knew I was going to die. It wasn't the expression of someone who had gained new power, it was the serene confidence of someone who had transcended the very concept of limitations. The air around him shimmered with authority that made reality itself seem negotiable, while his eyes held depths that spoke to cosmic understanding far beyond anything I had ever encountered. "Jack," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through dimensions I couldn't even perceive. "Thank you for showing me what I needed to become, what he needed to become." The words hit me like physical blows as I realized the scope of what I was facing. Arthur hadn't just broken through to immortal rank, he had transformed into something that operated according to completely different rules than the rest of us. I launched my most devastating attack, weaving nirvana and abyssal flames into spiraling combinations that should have incinerated anything within a 100-meter radius. The dual flames erupted from my position with enough force to level buildings, their opposing energies creating feedback loops that made the air itself scream. Arthur raised one hand, and my flames simply stopped existing. Not extinguished, not blocked. They stopped being fire and became something else entirely. Flower petals that drifted harmlessly to the ground, their purple and white colors beautiful and completely powerless. "Domain expansion," Arthur said with casual authority that made my blood run cold. "Mythweaver's garden." Reality folded around us like origami being reshaped by invisible hands. The ruined plaza vanished, replaced by something that felt like a cross between a fairy tale and a cosmic library. We stood in a garden where every flower told a story, where the trees grew books instead of leaves, and where the very air pulsed with narratives that rewrote the fundamental laws governing what was possible. In this space, Arthur continued, his transformed presence making him appear more like a force of nature than a human being. "I determine what stories have power. And your story, Jack, is that of a villain who burns but cannot destroy." I tried to summon my flames again, pouring every ounce of power I possessed into techniques that had never failed me before. The energies built within my magical channels reached my hands, began to manifest, and became butterflies. Thousands of delicate butterflies in shades of purple and white, fluttering around me with mocking beauty while I stared in growing horror at the complete impossibility of what was happening. My power, my magic, my very identity as someone who commanded destructive forces, all of it rendered meaningless by Arthur's casual rewriting of reality itself. "You don't understand?" I snarled, desperation bleeding through my usual composure as I launched myself at him physically, abandoning magic for raw combat prowess. "I loved her. I loved Alara more than you could ever." Arthur's fist connected with my solar plexus before I could finish the sentence, and the impact sent me flying backward through the mythical garden like a discarded toy. I hit one of the story trees with enough force to shatter my ribs, the pain exploding through my chest while narrative fragments from the disturbed branches rained down around me. "You loved her?" Arthur agreed with terrible gentleness as he approached my crumpled form. "And that makes what you did infinitely worse." I tried to rise, tried to fight back, tried to summon even a spark of the power that had made me feared throughout the magical world. But in this place, under the weight of Arthur's Mythweaver authority, I was nothing more than what he decreed I should be, a broken villain whose story was ending. She was so beautiful. I thought as Arthur's next blow shattered my left shoulder, the memory of Alara's final moments burning behind my eyes like acid. So perfect and pure and everything I could never be. I had watched her die, had seen the light fade from those violet eyes that had shown me the only glimpse of goodness I had ever encountered in my entire existence. The girl who had smiled at me during social gatherings, who had listened to my carefully crafted philosophical discussions with genuine interest, who had somehow managed to see past the charm and calculation to recognize that I was searching for something I couldn't name. Arthur's boot connected with my broken ribs, and I screamed as bone fragments tore through internal organs that were already failing. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony of knowing that I had participated in destroying the only beautiful thing I had ever found. She deserved better than both of us? I gasped, blood spraying from my mouth as I struggled to form words through the damage Arthur was systematically inflicting. But at least you tried to protect her. Arthur paused in his methodical destruction of my body, his transformed features showing something that might have been surprise. What? You were the hero? I continued, each word costing me breath I could barely spare. And I was the villain. That's how these stories are supposed to work, isn't it? The hero gets the girl, gets the power, gets everything he deserves for being good. I tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet cough that splattered more blood across the mythical flowers surrounding us. You already had 5 incredible women who loved you. 5. And you still tried to save her too. Because that's what heroes do. They protect everyone, save everyone, build happy endings for people who deserve them. Arthur's expression shifted to something approaching confusion, as if my words were challenging assumptions he hadn't realized he was making. But I wasn't finished. I needed him to understand, needed someone to know the truth before I died. I didn't deserve her, I whispered, my voice breaking with grief that had been building for months. I'm evil, Arthur. Genuinely, irredeemably evil. I've killed innocent people, destroyed families, served forces that want to end human civilization itself. What kind of monster falls in love with someone like Alara? The question hung in the air between us while Arthur stood over my broken form, his cosmic power making the very space around us vibrate with barely contained authority. In his transformed eyes, I could see him processing my words, trying to understand how someone could love purely while remaining fundamentally corrupt. The kind of monster who watches the girl he loves die because he's too much of a coward to choose her over his loyalty to evil. I answered my own question, the admission tearing from my throat like a physical wound. The kind who knows exactly what he is and loves someone anyway, knowing that love will only bring her pain. Arthur raised his hand, and I could see energy gathering around his fingers. Not fire or lightning, but something more fundamental. The power to simply decree that I should stop existing, to write me out of reality's story with the same casual authority he had used to transform my flames into butterflies. I closed my eyes and thought of Alara's smile. The way she had looked during that museum exhibition when she explained her theories about healing social wounds. The gentle patience in her voice when she tried to help me understand why kindness mattered more than strength. The pure radiance that had surrounded her as she sacrificed herself to save millions of people who would never know her name. At least I got to see her, I thought as Arthur's judgment descended toward me. At least I knew what perfect goodness looked like, even if I could never touch it. The killing blow never came. Instead, a single black rose materialized between Arthur's descending hand and my broken body, its petals darker than void and somehow more real than anything else in the mythical garden. The flower pulsed with power that made even Arthur's transformed authority pause, its presence creating ripples in reality that spoke to forces beyond both our understanding. The rose spoke with a voice like silk over steel. Not yet, young nightingale. This story requires a different ending. Arthur's eyes widened with recognition and something approaching alarm as he stepped backward from the impossible flower. Around us, his domain began to flicker and destabilize, the mythical garden wavering like a mirage in desert heat. As consciousness faded from my broken body, the last thing I saw was the black rose expanding into a portal of living shadow, its darkness promising escape from judgment and a continuation of the story I thought had ended. 3 hours after Jack's escape through the Black Rose portal, reinforcements finally arrived in numbers that could actually make a difference. I stood atop the ruins of what had once been the Imperial Palace, my transformed senses cataloging the scope of devastation that stretched across Avalon City like an open wound. 30 million people had called this place home that morning. Now, thanks to Alera's sacrifice, most of them would see another sunrise, but the city itself would never be the same. Military hover vehicles from all 5 continents converged on the capital in formations that painted the sky with their running lights, while emergency medical teams deployed across every district to handle casualties that numbered in the hundreds of thousands despite Alera's miraculous intervention. The political ramifications alone would reshape international relations for decades. Arthur, came Luna's voice in my mind, carrying undertones of concern that had nothing to do with external threats. There's someone who wants to speak with you. Before I could ask what she meant, reality shimmered around me. Not the aggressive rewriting that characterized my Mythweaver domain, but something gentler, like stepping from one room into another through a doorway that hadn't existed moments before. I found myself standing in a space that felt both familiar and impossible, the penthouse garden where I had proposed to Reika, but somehow existing outside normal time and space. The violet flowers bloomed with impossible perfection, while the city lights beyond the railing showed Avalon as it had been that morning, whole and peaceful and alive. "Congratulations on the 3rd gift," said a voice I recognized as my own. I turned to see myself, or rather, the original Arthur Nightingale, the one who had lived this life before I arrived to change it. He looked exactly as I remembered from when I saw him last in this form. "You?" I said with recognition that carried no surprise. "I wondered if you were still aware." "Always," original Arthur replied with a sad smile. "I've been watching everything unfold. You've done better than I ever could have imagined." He gestured toward the impossible garden around us, where flowers bloomed in patterns that told stories of their own. Mythweaver, the power to literally rewrite reality through narrative force. "It came at a cost," I said quietly, thinking of Alera's peaceful face as the light faded from her eyes. "A cost I'm not sure was worth paying." Original Arthur's expression grew somber as he studied my face with the understanding of someone who shared every memory except the most recent ones. "You loved her too, didn't you? Even though you started courting her for strategic reasons." "I did," I admitted, the words carrying weight I hadn't expected. "Not the same way I love the others, but she was special. Pure in a way that made everyone around her want to be better. And now she's gone, and you have the power you always needed to protect everyone else," original Arthur said with the kind of bitter wisdom that came from understanding cosmic ironies. "It's bittersweet, isn't it? Getting everything you wanted after losing someone you cared about." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest like a stone. The 3rd gift, immortal rank power, 8-circle magic. All of it came because she died. Because I failed to save her despite having 5 other women who trust me to protect them. "That's not how it works," original Arthur said gently. "Power doesn't come from failure, Arthur. It comes from choosing to grow beyond your limitations even when growth hurts. Alera's death wasn't the price of your advancement. It was the catalyst that showed you what you were already capable of becoming." Before I could respond, the garden around us began to shift and change, the impossible flowers transforming into displays of light and energy that formed patterns I somehow understood despite their complexity. "There's something else," original Arthur continued, his expression growing serious. "Something you need to see." The lights coalesced into a 3-dimensional map that showed not just our world, but others, dozens of planets connected by streams of energy that pulsed with familiar power. At the center of the constellation sat a world that radiated authority so intense it made my new immortal rank abilities feel insignificant by comparison. "Now that you've reached immortal rank and unlocked Mythweaver, you're ready for the next stage. The summoning network that brought the Demon Duke here can be reversed, but only by someone with your current power level. The implications crystallized with horrible clarity. You're saying I can use it to travel to other worlds, to train beyond what's possible on Earth, to become strong enough to protect not just your family and this world, but entire cosmic regions that will face threats you can't even imagine yet, Original Arthur said with absolute seriousness. But the window is closing. The network requires enormous power to activate, and it's been draining since the Duke's arrival. You have maybe an hour before it becomes unusable. An hour to say goodbye to everyone I cared about, to explain why I had to leave when they needed me most, to somehow make them understand that temporary abandonment was the only way to ensure their permanent safety. How long? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer would be devastating. 2 years minimum, maybe longer, depending on how quickly you can master the training that's waiting. Original Arthur's expression grew sympathetic as he watched my face process the implications. I know what you're thinking. 2 years feels like forever when you're leaving behind people you love. Stella? I whispered, thinking of my 9-year-old adopted daughter who had already lost so much. How do I explain to her that Daddy has to go away for 2 years? You don't explain, Original Arthur said gently. You promise to come back stronger. You promise that when you return, no one will ever be able to hurt the people you love again. The garden around us began to fade as reality reasserted itself, but Original Arthur's final words carried clearly through the transition. Tiamat will help you activate the portal when the time comes. She's been preparing for this moment since the day you first arrived in this world. I found myself back on the palace ruins, with Luna's concerned presence immediately wrapping around my consciousness. Arthur, you were unresponsive for several minutes. What happened? I know what I have to do, I replied, then activated my communication systems to contact everyone who mattered. And I have less than an hour to do it. The next 45 minutes passed in a blur of desperate farewells and hasty explanations that couldn't possibly convey the necessity of what I was about to do. My parents understood with the practical wisdom that had made them successful in business. Sometimes the hardest decisions were the most important ones. Arya hugged me with the fierce determination of someone who had grown into a remarkable young woman despite everything our family had endured. Rachel, Cecilia, Rose, Serafina, and Reka gathered around me with expressions that mixed support with barely controlled grief. They understood better than anyone what kind of threats required this level of preparation, but that intellectual understanding couldn't ease the emotional cost of separation. 2 years, Cecilia said with royal authority that couldn't quite hide her tears. You'd better come back exactly when you promise, Arthur. No delays, no extensions. No heroic sacrifices that keep you away longer. I'll be counting the days, Reka whispered, her violet eyes reflecting absolute faith despite her obvious pain. Every single one. But it was Stella who broke my heart completely. My 9-year-old daughter clung to me with desperate strength, her mathematical mind trying to process concepts that were too large and painful for any child to fully understand. But why do you have to go, Daddy? She sobbed into my shoulder. Can't you just stay here and protect us? You're already so strong. Because I need to become stronger, I explained as gently as possible while feeling time slip away like sand through my fingers. Strong enough that no one can ever hurt our family again. Strong enough to keep you safe forever. 2 years is 730 days, she whispered with the precision that had always characterized her approach to difficult emotions. That's so many days, Daddy. I know, sweetheart, but when I come back, we'll have forever. And forever is much longer than 730 days. The summoning circle began to activate beneath my feet. Ancient runes carved into stone that had been prepared by forces I was only beginning to understand. Power flowed through the geometric patterns with increasing intensity, while dimensional barriers grew thin enough to breach. That's when I felt her. Tiamat's presence touched my consciousness like the memory of infinite space and eternal fire, her primordial mana flowing through the summoning network to ensure its successful activation. Little Nightingale, her voice resonated through dimensions with amused affection. Ready to spread your wings beyond this small world? Ready? I confirmed, though saying goodbye to Stella's tear-stained face was the hardest thing I had ever done. The portal erupted into existence with light that temporarily blinded everyone present, its edges crackling with energies that spoke to technologies and magics far beyond terrestrial understanding. Through the radiance, I could see glimpses of another world. Alien skies, impossible architectures, and power signatures that made my new immortal rank abilities feel like a candle compared to the sun. "I love you all," I called out as the portal's pull became irresistible. "I'll come back strong enough to protect everything we've built." The last thing I saw before the dimensional transition consumed me was Stella's brave attempt to smile through her tears, waving goodbye to the father who had promised to become powerful enough to keep his word. 2 years, 730 days. Time to become the protector my family deserved. The dimensional transition ended with a bone-jarring impact that sent me tumbling across alien soil, my enhanced reflexes barely managing to prevent a face-first collision with what appeared to be crystalline trees that hummed with otherworldly energy. I rolled to my feet, immediately activating my magical senses to catalog threats while taking in my first glimpse of another world. The forest around me was beautiful in a way that made my chest tighten with unease. Trees of living crystal reached toward a sky that burned with 2 suns. One familiar yellow star, another that pulsed with deep crimson light that made shadows dance in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air itself carried a metallic tang that spoke to atmospheric composition fundamentally different from Earth's, while the ground beneath my feet felt somehow more solid, as if gravity operated according to different principles here. But it was the oppressive magical signatures in the distance that truly disturbed me. Dark presences that pulsed with malevolent authority, scattered throughout the continent like infection sites in a diseased body. "Welcome to Zirion Prime," came Original Arthur's voice from beside me, his form materializing with the same casual ease he had displayed in the impossible garden. "Current demonic stronghold and your home for the next 2 years. The casual way he delivered that information made my blood run cold. "Demonic stronghold?" I repeated, my hand instinctively moving to my sword hilt. "You brought me to a world controlled by demons?" "Occupied by demons," Original Arthur corrected with amusement at my reaction. "There's a difference. The local demon hierarchy tops out at marquee rank. Immortal level threats, certainly, but nothing you can't handle with proper preparation." I stared at him with growing comprehension. "The Demon Duke came from here, didn't he?" "Indeed. Vorthak was their regional commander until the Order of Fallen Flame managed to extract him for their assault on Earth. His absence has created something of a power vacuum among the local demonic forces." Original Arthur gestured toward the crystalline forest around us with obvious satisfaction. "Think of it as your personal training ground, complete with opponents who will push your abilities to their limits." Before I could respond to that ominous statement, movement in my peripheral vision made me look upward through the crystal canopy. What I saw there drove every other concern from my mind with the immediate impact of existential terror. Swimming through the space above the planet's atmosphere was something that defied every assumption I had ever made about what was possible. It was whale-like in its basic configuration, but larger than continents, its blue-silver hide rippling with bioluminescent patterns that spoke to intelligence far beyond anything I had encountered. Massive fins that could have been mistaken for mountain ranges propelled it through the vacuum with grace that made orbital mechanics look clumsy by comparison. The creature's presence in the void above us radiated power that made my newly achieved immortal rank abilities feel significant but not overwhelming, like recognizing a superior opponent rather than an incomprehensible force. "What?" I said with genuine curiosity rather than terror. "Is that?" "That," Original Arthur replied with the kind of casual tone people used to discuss weather patterns, "is an astral leviathan. Specifically, Voidsinger Mathis, guardian of the Zirion system, and the reason why demons can't simply portal reinforcements to this world whenever they feel like it." I continued watching the impossible creature as it undulated through space with movements that created aurora-like distortions in the planet's upper atmosphere. "It's keeping the demons trapped here? More accurately, it's preventing them from receiving reinforcements or evacuating to cause problems elsewhere. The demons are currently engaged in multi-front conflicts across several star systems, fighting everything from crystal entities to void-born collectives. They can't spare the resources to break Mathas's blockade. Original Arthur's expression grew more serious as he watched my reaction. But that won't last forever. The implications hit me like physical blows as I processed what he was telling me. How long do we have? 3 years, maybe 4 if the demon's other conflicts intensify. After that, they'll send a demon archduke to eliminate Mathas and extract their trapped forces. Original Arthur let that information settle before continuing. Archdukes are high to peak radiant rank. Even with 2 years of intensive training, you won't be strong enough to survive that kind of encounter. The comparison made my enhanced capabilities suddenly feel appropriately scaled rather than inadequate. I could challenge the Leviathan with proper preparation, but an Archduke would be beyond my reach even with accelerated development. So I need to get past Mathas and return home before the Archduke arrives, I said with growing understanding of the challenge ahead. Exactly. Original Arthur began walking deeper into the crystalline forest, gesturing for me to follow. Fortunately, this world provides exactly the kind of challenges that will force that growth. We walked through groves where crystal trees sang with harmonic frequencies that made my bones resonate, while bioluminescent flowers provided light that somehow enhanced magical perception. In the distance, I could sense the demonic presences moving through their territories, marquee-level threats that would provide genuine challenges without being immediately lethal. Start with your gifts. Original Arthur continued as we found a clearing where the dual sun's light created patterns that shifted between natural illumination and geometric mandala displays. Soul Resonance, Lucent Harmony, and Myth Weaver. You've been using them individually when they're designed to work in harmony. How? I asked, though part of me suspected the answer would be more complex than I wanted. Each of your gifts corresponds to an aspect, Original Arthur explained. Soul Resonance is of course soul aspect, Lucent Harmony is body aspect, and Myth Weaver is mind aspect. Use them as much. The theoretical framework he was describing made my mind race with possibilities. I had been thinking of my gifts as separate capabilities, but what he was suggesting was systematic integration that would create exponential rather than additive improvements. Your grade 6 art is similarly underdeveloped, he continued. Godflash, Hollow Eclipse, and Stellar Cascade are impressive individually, but they're components of a larger technique that you haven't discovered yet. 2 years should be enough time to develop the 4th and possibly 5th movements, assuming you can handle the pressure of constant combat. The demons will provide that pressure? I asked, already knowing the answer. The local marquises are intelligent, aggressive, and desperate to prove themselves worthy of promotion now that Vorthak is gone. They'll hunt you relentlessly once they detect your presence, giving you the kind of life-or-death motivation that accelerates development. Original Arthur's smile carried dark amusement. And my necromantic development? I asked, sensing Erebus and Valeria stirring with anticipation in response to the ambient magical energy. Erebus and Valeria will also grow here. Original Arthur gestured toward the twisted landscape around us. Plus, every demon you kill will provide opportunities to study different approaches to immortality and supernatural existence. I nodded, feeling the scope of the training program settling into place. And pure light and deep dark will become tools for more than just balance. The local demons use corruption techniques that can only be countered through understanding both creation and entropy as fundamental forces. You'll learn to weave them into applications that don't exist in standard magical theory. The Astral Leviathan song drifted down from space above us, a harmonic vibration that made the crystal trees resonate in response while creating patterns of light that spoke to intelligence beyond anything I had previously encountered. Looking up at that impossible creature, I felt challenge rather than despair. This was difficult but achievable. 2 years to become strong enough to kill a cosmic guardian while avoiding marquee-level demons who want to kill me, I said, more to myself than to Original Arthur. 2 years to become worthy of returning to protect the people you love, he corrected gently. The question is whether you're ready to pay the price that kind of growth requires. I thought of Stella's tear-stained face, of the 5 women who had agreed to wait for me despite not knowing what form I might take when I returned. I thought of Alera's sacrifice and the millions of people who were alive because she had chosen to burn her life force for their benefit. "I'm ready," I said with absolute conviction that seemed to resonate through the alien forest around us. "Show me where to begin." Original Arthur's smile carried approval and something that might have been pride. "Then let's start with establishing a base camp that won't immediately attract every demon on the continent. Your first lesson begins now." The training that would reshape me from immortal rank mage to cosmic level force was about to begin. Chapter 800, 2 years. 1. Time moved with cruel indifference through the ruins of what had once been the greatest city in human civilization. 2 years had passed since the night Avalon City burned, since 30 million souls had faced annihilation at the hands of the Order of Fallen Flame. 2 years since the darkness was held back by sacrifices so profound they had reshaped the very foundations of the Empire. Yet time, uncaring of heroism or tragedy, continued its relentless march toward an uncertain future. The wind carried autumn's chill through the Memorial Gardens, a vast expanse of pristine white marble that had been carved from the ruins of the old noble district. Hundreds of thousands of names were etched into stone. Imperial knights who had held the line, nighthawks who had died in shadow, civilians who had perished protecting their families. Each marker told a story of courage in the face of impossible odds. But at the heart of the memorial, elevated on a platform that caught the morning light, stood 2 tombs that drew pilgrims from across all 5 continents. Emperor Quinn Slatemark knelt before those sacred stones, his imperial robes abandoned in favor of simple black mourning clothes. The weight of 2 years pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden, each day since that terrible night adding another layer to the guilt that had become his constant companion. The first tomb bore a simple inscription: Archduke Leopold Astoria, beloved father, loyal servant, demon slayer. The second, somehow more devastating in its brevity: Alera Astoria, the healing light, saved 3 million souls. "I was wrong about everything," Quinn whispered to the wind, his voice carrying the rasp of a man who had spoken these words too many times. His hands trembled as he traced Leopold's name. 20 years of suspicion. 20 years of watching you like an enemy when you were the most loyal man in the Empire. Empress Adeline stood a respectful distance behind her husband, her silver eyes reflecting patient understanding. She had watched Quinn struggle with guilt and regret for 2 years, had seen him wake from nightmares where Leopold's voice echoed with unspoken forgiveness. "The reports from the borders grow worse each week," Quinn continued, his voice taking on the hollow tone he used when discussing threats beyond their control. "Demonic incursions increasing, the order rebuilding, and we're weaker." His voice cracked. "Our 2 strongest nobles gone." The memorial gardens stretched around them in perfect silence, the usual crowds of pilgrims cleared away by security protocols. Only the wind moved through the carefully tended paths, carrying the scent of violets and roses that had begun growing spontaneously around the platform. Quinn's enhanced senses swept the area automatically, a habit drilled into him by years of assassination attempts and political intrigue. The magical wards hummed with quiet efficiency. The guard posts reported all clear, and his own radiant rank awareness detected nothing but autumn wind and grieving silence. Nothing at all, which made the voice that suddenly spoke from behind him hit like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, Alera." Quinn's blood turned to ice. His head whipped around so fast something in his neck cracked, imperial reflexes engaging even as his mind struggled to process the impossible. Someone was here. Someone was here, in the most secure location in the Empire, speaking with grief so profound it made the air itself seem to weep. But there had been nothing. No approach, no presence, no disturbance in the magical fields that surrounded this place like layers of impenetrable armor. A figure knelt between the 2 tombs, draped in a traveling cloak that seemed to absorb the morning light. The fabric was stained with substances that Quinn's enhanced senses couldn't identify. Not blood, not dirt, but something that didn't belong to any earthly classification. "Who?" Adeline began, but her voice died as the stranger rose with fluid grace that made physics itself seem negotiable. The air around the figure shimmered, not with heat or magical distortion, but with something far more unsettling. Reality itself seemed uncertain in his presence, as if the fundamental laws governing existence were politely stepping aside to accommodate something that operated according to different rules entirely. Quinn felt his knees threaten to buckle as recognition hit him like a tsunami of impossible understanding. The worn cloak, the way shadows bent around the figure's form, the sense that space itself was making room for something too large to be contained in human dimensions. When the stranger reached up to lower his hood, Quinn's world fundamentally reordered itself around a truth too vast to immediately comprehend. The face was older, carved by experiences that would have destroyed lesser beings. Black hair fell longer now, framing features that held depths Quinn couldn't fathom. But the azure eyes, those were unmistakable, even as they reflected understanding that belonged to cosmic forces rather than mortal concerns. Arthur Nightingale stood before them, and the very air seemed to bow in his presence. Quinn's mouth went dry as his enhanced senses finally registered what they were dealing with. The feeling that had haunted him since the Demon Duke's appearance, the same crushing certainty of facing something fundamentally superior, it was here again, radiating from the man who was his daughter's fiancé. But this was different. The Duke had felt like malevolent hunger given form. This felt like authority, the kind of power that didn't need to threaten because its very existence rewrote the rules of every conflict. "Arthur," Quinn managed to whisper, though his voice came out strangled. "You're—" Arthur's eyes moved to him with the kind of gentle attention that cosmic forces might show to particularly interesting insects. Not cruel, not dismissive, but carrying the weight of perspective that reduced imperial power to quaint local concerns. "Hello, Quinn," Arthur said simply. The words themselves were normal, almost casual, but they carried harmonics that made the memorial stones resonate, that caused the flowers around Alara's tomb to bloom brighter, that sent ripples through magical wards designed to contain radiant rank threats. Quinn felt his knees hit the marble platform as his body made a decision his mind was still struggling with. This wasn't kneeling in submission. This was kneeling in recognition of something that belonged in the same category as the forces of nature themselves. "Impossible," Adeline breathed, though she too was sinking toward the ground as her magical senses screamed warnings about proximity to something that shouldn't exist. Arthur's gaze moved to Alara's tomb, and for just a moment, the cosmic authority flickered. Beneath it, Quinn caught a glimpse of grief so profound it made his own guilt look shallow by comparison. "I promised I'd come back stronger," Arthur said to the carved stone, his voice carrying weight that made the air itself seem to listen. "Strong enough that no one would ever have to die the way you did again." The wind picked up around them, but it wasn't natural weather. It was the world itself responding to Arthur's presence, reality bending to accommodate something that had transcended its normal limitations. Quinn looked up at the man who had built a guild and was engaged to 5 remarkable women, who had disappeared into impossible light 2 years ago. Now Arthur stood before them transformed into something that made Quinn's radiant rank power feel like a candle before the sun. The age of struggling against impossible odds was ending. Arthur Nightingale had returned, and Quinn finally understood what it meant when a nightingale's voice truly pierced the sky.